Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened power of the apocalypse and fell in love with Kuroka, the stray devil cat? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unraveling. The world was dying. It was not a slow, gentle death, like the fading of autumn leaves, but a screaming, violent end torn from the pages of a mad god's scripture. The very air had been ripped open, exposing a sky of sickly crimson that pulsed with a light that offered no warmth, only the promise of oblivion. Chunks of shattered earth, ripped from a world that no longer existed, floated in the void like forgotten tombstones. This was Kagaya Otsutsuki's private canvas, and she painted with the color of annihilation. Naruto Uzumaki's lungs burned. Every breath was a sip of poison, thick with dust and the cloying ozone tang of dimensional energy. His body, cloaked in the incandescent gold of the Six Paths Sage Mode, was a latticework of agony. A deep gash ran from his shoulder to his hip, sluggishly knitting itself back together with the blistering red chakra of the Nine Tails. He could feel Kurama's rage and exhaustion mirroring his own, a roaring inferno banked low, threatening to sputter into embers. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Sakura was a splash of pink and crimson against the gray devastation, her hands glowing with the serene green of her medic. Al ninjutsu as she knelt over a prone Obito. Even from this distance, Naruto could see the tremors in her arms, the sheer force of will it took to keep going when her reserves were scraping bottom. Kakashi stood guard over them, his single Sharingan a frantic pinwheel, scanning the chaotic battlefield for the next inevitable assault. His posture was tight, the stance of a man who knew he was outmatched but refused to yield. And Sasuke was a pillar of defiant shadow. His Rinnegan was a cosmic spiral of purple, weeping a single tear of blood that traced a stark path down his pale cheek. The strain of using its spatial abilities to counter Kagaya's world hopping was immense. He was their anchor in this storm, the only reason they hadn't been separated and picked off one by one. But anchors could break. She's coming. Sasuke's voice was a low rasp, devoid of its usual arrogance, stripped down to pure, tactical warning. Naruto's head snapped forward. Kagaya descended from the blood-red sky, not with a roar or a show of force, but with an unnerving, silent grace. Her white robes flowed around her like a burial shroud, her impossibly long hair drifting as if underwater. Her face, framed by the two horn-like protrusions, was a mask of divine indifference. But it was her eyes, the Byakugan in their pearlescent, vacant stare, and the third, the Rinne Sharingan on her forehead, a crimson wound bleeding raw power, that froze the soul. She was not a foe to be fought. She was a natural disaster in human form. She raised a delicate, white hand. The air around her palm shimmered, and a bone, gray and brittle looking, slid into her grasp, an all-killing ash bone. The name was not an exaggeration. It was a statement of fact. Anything it touched ceased to be, not just killed, but unwritten from existence. It ends now. Her voice was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a thought that wormed its way directly into their minds. It was ancient, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. This world, this chakra, it is all mine. You were merely thieves, returning what was stolen. Naruto's fists clenched, the golden chakra around them flaring. It was never yours to begin with. He roared, his voice raw. Chakra is what connects people. It's the proof that we're not alone. Kagaya's expression didn't change, but the Rinne Sharingan on her forehead pulsed. Connection breeds conflict. Emotion breeds error. I will bring silence. I will bring peace. Her peace was the silence of the grave. She didn't launch the bone. She simply appeared before him. One moment she was 100 yards away, the next, her cold, dead eyes were inches from his. Sasuke had tried to switch their positions, but she had anticipated it, overriding his spatial jutsu with her own superior command of reality. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Naruto saw the bone in her hand moving, a gray sliver of absolute death aimed for his heart. He moved to block, to dodge, to do something, but his body felt like it was encased in lead. He was too slow. They were all too slow. Then, Sasuke was there. A blur of black and purple. He'd used the last dregs of his power not to switch places, but for a burst of pure, desperate speed. throwing himself in the path of the attack. His Susanoo flared, a skeletal ribcage of amethyst chakra erupting to shield them. The ash bone touched it. There was no explosion, no grand impact. The Susanoo, an absolute defense that had stood against cage-level attacks, simply flaked away. It turned to gray dust, the chakra construct dissolving like sand in the wind. The bone continued its path, piercing Sasuke's side. A choked gasp escaped Sasuke's lips. His eyes widened, not in pain, but in sheer shock as he watched his own body begin to disintegrate. The gray decay spread from the wound, his flesh turning to ash. Sasuke. Naruto's scream was a physical thing, a shockwave of sound and golden energy that ripped through the air. Seeing his rival, his brother, being erased from existence was the breaking point. Something shattered within him. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a technique. It was a primal, instinctual rejection of reality. All the power he held, the six paths sage energy, Kurama's boundless chakra, the slivers of power from the other tailed beasts, the hope of every shinobi he was connected to, surged not outward but inward. Kagaya pulled the bone free, ready to strike again. But she paused. The energy pouring from Naruto was changing. It was no longer just the vibrant, life-affirming gold of the sun. It was corrupting, twisting. Black lines, like cracks in reality, spread through the golden shroud. The life force of Kurama, the divine energy of the sage, and the deathly touch of Kagaya's attack that still lingered on the battlefield. A trace of its power clinging to the air itself. These three forces, life, divinity, and death, created an impossible, volatile trinity inside him. The world seemed to hold its breath. A profound, deafening silence fell. Then, from the deepest core of Naruto's being, came a single, resonant click. It was not a sound, but a feeling. The feeling of a lock, ancient and rusted, finally turning. His perception of the world fractured and reassembled in an instant. He no longer saw just people and chakra. He saw more. He saw the universe in its rawest form. He could perceive the intent behind every action as a tangible force. He saw the burning, defiant will of his friends as flickering flames. He saw the cold, oppressive order of Kagaya as a crushing weight. And he saw the roiling, chaotic energy of the battle itself, the violence. The strategy, the desperation, the bloodlust, as a crimson ocean churning around them. An ocean he could now command. The golden chakra cloak didn't just burn brighter, it changed state. It hardened, taking on the appearance of polished, ethereal armor, etched with swirling, black patterns that seemed to drink the light. The truth-seeking orbs behind him dissolved, not into nothingness, but into 9 floating, black rings that hummed with a menacing resonance. His eyes, once a vibrant cerulean blue, became voids of pure, focused purpose, glowing with an internal, white-hot light. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki, host of the 9 Tails. He had become an avatar for a concept as old as consciousness itself. He had become war. Kagaya's divine indifference finally cracked. For the first time since her revival, she felt a flicker of something she had long forgotten: fear. The being before her was radiating a pressure that made her own feel insignificant. It was a primordial force, an engine of pure conflict. Naruto moved. He didn't use a body flicker technique. He simply ceased to be in one place and appeared in another. He was standing beside Sasuke, his hand gently placed over the wound. The gray decay, the absolute power of the all-killing ash bone, halted. It didn't reverse, it simply stopped, held in abeyance by a will that was now just as absolute. He looked at Sasuke, his voice calm, yet carrying an echo of 1,000 battlefields. Rest. I will handle this. He turned to face Kagaya. He raised a single hand, his fingers splayed. He didn't weave a sign. He just gestured. Across the battlefield, the White Zetsu army, an extension of Kagaya's will, stopped its advance. Their hive mind was flooded with a force they could not comprehend. It was pure, undiluted conflict, stripped of loyalty or purpose. Their will to fight for their creator shattered, replaced by a mindless, frenzied bloodlust directed at the nearest target, each other. The disciplined army dissolved into a chaotic, cannibalistic mob, tearing itself apart in a frenzy of self-destruction. Kagaya stared, her Byakugan eyes wide with disbelief. Her connection to her soldiers was gone. severed by a power that had turned her own weapon against her. "What are you?" she breathed, the thought echoing in the minds of everyone present. Naruto didn't answer. He walked towards her, his steps measured and silent. The ground beneath his feet didn't crack from power, it seemed to solidify, to brace itself for his passage. Kagaya reacted on instinct, her hair lashing out like a torrent of silver needles, each one capable of piercing a mountain. Naruto didn't dodge, he simply walked through the storm. The needles that should have shredded him passed through his armored form as if it were a phantom. Yet, he was undeniably solid. It was as if he existed on a slightly different plane of causality, where her attacks were simply irrelevant. He appeared before her, his and reaching not for her throat or her heart, but for the ash bone she held clutched in her hand. His armored fingers closed around it. The bone, a weapon of absolute death, began to vibrate, then crack. It crumbled into gray dust, neutralized by a force that governed the very essence of struggle and destruction. Kagaya recoiled, her body moving through the dimension, reappearing 100 feet away in a vortex of spatial energy. She opened a rift, a tear into her lava dimension, intending to cast him into a sea of molten rock. Naruto raised an eyebrow. The rift shuddered and collapsed in on itself. He hadn't overpowered her jutsu. He had imposed his will upon it. The concept of escape was a form of conflict, and in his presence, he was the only one who could dictate the terms of engagement. This was no longer a fight. It was an execution. He flowed towards her, an unstoppable force. Kagaya's desperation grew, her attacks becoming more frantic. She unleashed volleys of chakra fists, planet-sized truth-seeking orbs. Waves of dimensional force. It was the full, unrestrained power of a god. And it did nothing. Naruto moved through it all, untouched, his expression one of cold, analytical focus. He wasn't fueled by rage or hatred. He was simply acting. He was a force of nature, as impersonal and as final as an earthquake. He reached her again. This time, his movements were a blur of perfect, brutal efficiency. A strike to her arm shattered the bone. A palm heel to her chest ruptured her chakra network. A precise chop to her neck severed her connection to the 10 tails. Each blow was not just a physical impact. It was an attack on her very being. He was dismantling her, piece by piece, with the cold precision of a surgeon. He pinned her against a floating monolith of rock, his hand gripping her throat. She struggled, her divine power sputtering, failing. The goddess, the progenitor of chakra, was reduced to a helpless creature. "This conflict is over," he stated. His voice was final. He wasn't going to seal her. Sealing was a temporary solution, a continuation of the struggle. He was going to end it. His free hand rose, palm open, and a sphere of utter blackness, a void that devoured light and hope, materialized. It was not a Rasengan or a tailed beast bomb. It was a manifestation of pure finality. He pushed it into her chest. Kagaya's eyes widened in terror as she felt her very essence, her concept, being unmade. She was not just dying. She was being erased from the ledger of reality. Her body dissolved, not into dust, but into nothingness, her final, silent scream absorbed by the void. The act of erasing a god, however, came with a price. The universe, for a brief moment, had a hole in it, a wound where a being of immense power used to be. The energy backlash was cataclysmic. Reality itself buckled. Behind Naruto, the air did not just crack, it tore. A silent, black wound opened in the fabric of space-time. It was not a portal or a rift, it was a hungry, silent nothingness. A place where the rules of the universe had ceased to apply. It exerted a gentle, irresistible pull. The ethereal armor around Naruto dissolved, the black rings faded, and the white-hot light in his eyes dimmed, returning to their normal blue. The power receded, and the backlash of using it, along with all his previous injuries, hit him like a tidal wave. Agony, sharp and absolute, flooded every nerve. His vision swam. The strength fled his limbs, and he collapsed to his knees, his body trembling violently. "Naruto," he heard Sakura's voice, faint and distant, as if shouted from across a chasm. He saw Sasuke, leaning heavily on Kakashi, his own wound stabilized but his face a mask of horrified awe. They were rushing towards him, but they seemed to be moving in slow motion. The pull from the tear in reality grew stronger. It wasn't violent or explosive. It was a patient, inexorable tide, tugging at his soul. He tried to fight it, to dig his fingers into the shattered rock. But he had no strength left. He was being lifted, drawn into the silent, black maw. His last sight of his world was of his friends, his family, their faces contorted in desperation as they reached for him. Their cries swallowed by the silence of the void. Then, the darkness took him. The journey was a sensory nightmare. There was a feeling of immense, crushing pressure, as if a planet were squeezing him from all sides. Then, a screaming silence that was louder than any explosion. Flashes of color that his brain had no name for assaulted his vision, the color of jealousy, the shade of forgotten time. The light of a star being born and dying in the same instant. His existence was being unspooled and rethreaded on a cosmic loom. And then, impact. It was a jarring, brutal stop. He landed hard, the impact knocking the last of the air from his already burning lungs. The surface beneath him was unyielding and rough. It wasn't the soft earth of the Leaf Village or the shattered rock of Kagaya's dimension. It was something else, cracked, gritty, and cold. He groaned, the sound a wet, broken thing. He lay there for an eternity, caught between consciousness and oblivion. Slowly, sluggishly, his senses began to return, bringing with them a torrent of alien information. The smell. That was the first thing he registered. It was a thick, chemical stench of something he now recognized as exhaust, mingled with the damp, earthy smell of rain on stone, and the sour odor of rotting garbage from somewhere nearby. It was foul, and completely foreign. The sounds. A high-pitched wail rose and fell in the distance. A strange, rhythmic siren. There was a low, constant hum, the sound of electricity flowing through unseen wires. And a deep rumble, the sound of some kind of engine, passed by the entrance of wherever he was. Naruto forced his eyes open. The world was a blurry mess of dark shapes and dim, artificial light. He was in a narrow alleyway, the high walls of towering feet. Yurless buildings rising on either side of him. A single, flickering yellow light high above cast long, distorted shadows. Rain, fine and misty, drifted down, slicking the grimy asphalt beneath him. He pushed himself up with a grunt, his muscles screaming in protest. His body was a roadmap of pain. The gash on his side had closed, but the memory of the injury lingered. His head throbbed, and a wave of dizziness washed over him. He was wounded, drained, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. Where was he? Was this another of Kagaya's dimensions? No, this felt different. This place felt real, solid, but it wasn't his world. He couldn't feel the familiar pulse of natural energy. Instead, the air was thick with a dozen other energies, strange and discordant to his senses. His enhanced senses, even dulled as they were, picked up a subtle shift in the shadows at the far end of the alley. A presence. It was watching him. Naruto's body tensed, a flicker of Kurama's red chakra instinctively coating him like a second skin. He slowly, painfully, pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly as he leaned against the cold, damp brick wall for support. From the deepest shadows, a figure emerged. It moved with a liquid, predatory grace. Each step silent and deliberate. The dim light caught her form, revealing a young woman of stunning beauty, with long, lustrous black hair and eyes the color of molten gold. Two black cat ears twitched atop her head, and behind her, two long, black tails swished lazily through the air. She wore a revealing kimono that did little to hide her voluptuous figure, but there was nothing soft about her. Her posture, the calculating glint in her eyes, the faint aura of dangerous power that clung to her, it all screamed predator. She stopped about 20 feet away, her head tilted in curiosity. She could smell the blood on him, rich and potent. But beneath it, she could feel the power radiating from him in chaotic, sleeping waves. It was immense, terrifying, and utterly unlike anything she had ever encountered. It wasn't the ordered magic of a devil, the holy light of an angel, or the tainted aura of a fallen. It was something else, something primordial. They stood in silence for a long moment. A tense standoff in the rain-slicked alley. He assessed her. A clear threat, her power coiled and ready, but she wasn't making a move. She assessed him. A wounded beast, but a beast of unimaginable power. He was a paradox, a wounded god bleeding in a gutter, and her curiosity was a palpable thing. Finally, she took a slow, deliberate step forward, the sound of her sandal a soft splash in a puddle. A low, inquisitive purr, like the rumble of a jungle cat, vibrated in her chest, breaking the oppressive silence. A playful, dangerous smirk touched her lips. Well now, her voice was a sultry, husky velvet that slid through the damp air. What kind of trouble did you get yourself into, handsome? Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Feline Alliance. The woman's voice as a physical presence in the damp alley, a silken cord that wrapped around the tension and pulled it taut. Naruto remained perfectly still, his body a paradox of exhaustion and lethal readiness. His mind, honed by years of war, was already dissecting the situation. She was not human. The 2 ears and tails were obvious markers, but it was the energy she radiated that told the real story. It was a dark, potent energy, laced with something wild and natural that felt entirely distinct from the chakra he knew. It was confident, coiled, and held in reserve. A predator. He didn't answer her question. Instead, his gaze swept over her, cataloging details. The way her weight was balanced perfectly on the balls of her feet, ready to spring in any direction. The slight, almost imperceptible twitch of her cat ears, tracking the ambient sounds of the city he was still struggling to process. The lazy, swishing motion of her tails, which he knew was anything but lazy, it was a sign of a creature constantly aware of its surroundings. "You're hurt," she stated, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. Her smirk didn't vanish, but it lost some of its playful edge, replaced by a sharper, more analytical glint. "You smell of blood, ozone. And something else. Something old." Naruto's own senses were screaming at him. He could feel the power thrumming beneath her skin. It felt like a controlled storm, vast and dangerous. More than that, he could feel a weariness in her, a faint but persistent scent of flight, of being hunted. It was a scent he recognized well. He finally pushed himself off the wall, hissing as a jolt of pain shot through his side. He stood on his own, the movement a clear declaration that he was not helpless. "Who are you?" His voice was a low rasp, rough from dehydration and exhaustion. It held no fear, only a demand for information. The woman's smirk returned in full force. She seemed to appreciate his directness. "They call me Kuroka," she said, her voice dropping into that sultry purr again. "And you, handsome, are the most interesting thing to fall into my lap in a very long time. You literally fell, didn't you? I felt it, a tear in the world, and then you." So she knew, or at least, she'd sensed his arrival. That complicated things. He couldn't afford to show weakness, but he also couldn't afford a fight. Not now. He needed time. Time to heal, to understand, to find a way back. "I'm looking for a way home," he said, his voice flat. It was a partial truth, the only one he was willing to give. Kuroka let out a soft, musical laugh. "Home. From the look of you, home is a long, long way away. And you won't get there bleeding out in a Kuo back alley, NYA . She took another step closer, her movements fluid and utterly confident. "Here's the deal. You're powerful, even half dead. You feel like a walking natural disaster. I'm powerful, and I have people I'd rather avoid. A beast like you could be a useful deterrent." Naruto's eyes narrowed. "I'm not a beast, and I'm not a deterrent for hire." "Of course not," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Think of it as a partnership. An alliance of outcasts." The word hung in the air between them, striking a chord deep within him. Outcast. It was a label he'd worn his entire life. "I can offer you a place to lie low, to heal. I know this city, its scents, its shadows. I can help you understand this world you've stumbled into. In return," she paused, her golden eyes locking onto his. "You tell me what you are. And when my troublesome old friends come sniffing around, you help me remind them why they should leave me alone." It was a pragmatic offer. A transactional one, and it was exactly what he needed. Information and shelter. He didn't trust her. He trusted no one in this strange, hostile place, but he understood her motivations. Survival. It was a language they both spoke fluently. "Fine," he clipped out. "A temporary alliance." Kuroka's smile was radiant, a flash of white in the gloom. "Excellent. I knew you were a smart one. Come on, my little disaster. My current nest isn't far." She turned and began to walk, her hips swaying with an exaggerated motion that was both a provocation and a display of utter self-assurance. Naruto hesitated for only a second before following, keeping a safe distance. Every instinct screamed at him not to turn his back on her, but he needed to see this new world. Leaving the claustrophobic confines of the alley was a sensory assault. The city, Kuo, she'd called it, was a roaring, glittering beast. Towering buildings of glass and steel scraped the perpetually overcast sky, their surfaces slick with rain and reflecting the lurid glow of 1,000 neon signs. Strange metal carriages, which Kuroka called cars, rumbled past on black rivers of asphalt, their headlights cutting through the gloom. The air was a cacophony of sounds, the hiss of tires on wet pavement, the distant thumping of music, the murmur of voices speaking a language he understood yet had never heard. It was overwhelming. His world, for all its elemental power and epic battles, had been one of wood, stone, and nature. This place was a monument to artifice, a jungle of steel and electricity. And beneath it all, his senses, now recalibrating to this new reality, felt the thrum of unfamiliar energies. As they walked, he felt a knot of dark, ordered power concentrated in a large, sprawling complex of buildings on a nearby hill. "What is that place?" he asked, his voice low. Kuroka glanced over her shoulder, a knowing look in her eyes. Kuo Academy. By day, a school for oblivious little humans. By night, the heart of the local devil territory. The two heiresses who run this town, Rias Gramori and Sona Citri, make their base there. Best to stay clear. They don't like strays in their yard. Devils. The word sounded archaic, mythological. Yet the energy he felt was real, and it matched the dark power he sensed from Kuroka. A few moments later, they passed a stately old building with a steeple. And he felt a completely different kind of energy. It was warm, bright, and felt restrictive. It made the hairs on his arms stand up, and he could feel Kurama stir irritably within him. A church, Kuroka explained without him having to ask, her nose wrinkling in distaste. Angel territory. Smells like ozone and sanctimony. They're just as bad as the devils, just with better marketing. Angels and devils, living in the same city, carving it up into territories like rival gangs. This world was far more complex than he'd imagined. His own world's conflicts were born of nations, clans, and ideologies. This felt older, more fundamental. As they moved deeper into a more neglected part of the city, a tangle of narrow streets and derelict buildings, Naruto felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It was a faint, high-frequency vibration in the air, a sense of being observed not by eyes, but by something far more alien. The streetlights they passed flickered in a strange, erratic rhythm. "Do you feel that?" he asked, his head tilting. Kuroka's ears twitched. "Feel what?" "The usual background static. This whole city hums with magic, handsome. You get used to it." He frowned. No, this was different. It wasn't the ambient hum of devil or angel magic. This was cold, sterile, and felt like a scalpel, dissecting the world from a distance. He filed the sensation away. Another threat for another time. Right now, he had more immediate problems. His instincts screamed a warning a split second before the ambush. The scent of aggression, of cheap magic and desperation, flooded the air. "Looks like some of my fan club found me," Kuroka sighed, her playful tone gone, replaced by a weary annoyance. 3 figures dropped from the rooftops, landing in a half-circle in front of them, blocking the street. 2 more emerged from the shadows behind, cutting off their retreat. They were a motley crew, all bearing the same dark energy as Kuroka, but it was frayed, uncontrolled. Strays. The one in the lead was a hulking brute of a man with the head of a boar, tusks jutting from his maw. "Kuroka," he grunted, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Big bounty on your head. Lord Ba, L is willing to pay a fortune for the traitor who killed her master." Kuroka's expression turned venomous. "I did the underworld a favor by getting rid of that pig. He got what he deserved." "Doesn't matter," the boar devil sneered, his piggish eyes landing on Naruto. "And look what we have here. A new plaything. We'll take him too. Might fetch a decent price as a slave." Naruto's eyes went cold. He'd had enough of slavery, of chains, of people being treated as objects. He took a half-step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Kuroka. 5 of them, he stated, his voice dangerously calm. His eyes flicked from one to the other, his mind instantly calculating trajectories, weaknesses, and threat levels. The big one is the leader. The two behind us are the weakest, they're trying to act tough. The lizard man on the left is fast. The woman with the wings is a ranged fighter. Kuroka stared at the back of his head, momentarily stunned. He'd assessed their entire opposition in less than 3 seconds. And his analysis was perfectly accurate. "I'll take the two behind us and the flyer," she said, a grin spreading across her face. "You think you can handle the big guy and his lizard friend, handsome?" Naruto didn't answer. He just started walking forward. The boar devil roared and charged, his fists glowing with a crude, explosive demonic energy. The lizard man darted to the side, a blur of green scales. Trying to flank Naruto. Naruto's movements were a study in brutal economy. He didn't meet the boar's charge head-on. At the last possible second, he pivoted on his heel, his body flowing around the massive frame. His hand shot out, not in a punch, but in an open palm strike that slapped the side of the boar's knee. It wasn't a blow meant to break, but to buckle. The joint gave way with a wet pop, and the charging behemoth went down with a surprised bellow, his own momentum sending him skidding across the wet asphalt. Simultaneously, the lizard man struck, claws extended. Naruto, still in motion from his pivot, didn't even seem to look. His left arm came up in a seemingly casual block. The lizard's claws, which could shred steel, scraped against Naruto's forearm with a screech of metal on metal. They didn't even break the skin. The faint, residual power of his war aspect had hardened his body to an insane degree. The lizard man's eyes widened in shock. That split second of hesitation was all Naruto needed. He grabbed the stray's arm, twisted, and used its own momentum to swing it like a club, smashing it bodily into the still recovering boar devil. Sound of cracking ribs echoed in the narrow street. While this was happening, Kuroka was a whirlwind of graceful death. The two strays behind them lunged, only to be met by a shimmering barrier of purple energy that erupted from the ground. As they recoiled, one of Kuroka's tails shot out, impossibly long, and wrapped around one's neck, lifting him off the ground, choking. She blew a kiss towards the winged woman, and from her lips shot a stream of golden energy that twisted into the shape of a snarling tiger. The construct of pure senjutsu slammed into the flyer, sending her crashing into the side of a building with enough force to shatter brick. Kuroka landed lightly on her feet, dispatching the second stray with a swift kick that was empowered with enough jujutsu to send him flying down the street. She turned, expecting to see Naruto still engaged with the two strongest. Instead, the fight was already over. Naruto stood over the two groaning, broken strays. He hadn't used a single jutsu. He hadn't flared his power. He had simply dismantled them with a terrifying, cold efficiency that spoke of 1,000 life or death battles. He hadn't just defeated them, he had dominated the very flow of the conflict, turning their aggression and momentum into weapons to be used against them. He looked at the whimpering boar devil, his eyes devoid of emotion. "Tell your Lord Baal," he said, his voice low and carrying an unnatural weight, "that Kuroka is under my protection. Come after her again, and I will come for him." He punctuated the statement by stomping on the boar's remaining good leg. The sharp crack of bone was the only answer. He then turned and walked back towards Kuroka, leaving the 5 strays broken and terrified, but alive. Kuroka watched him approach, her usual playful smirk absent. She had seen power before. She had seen skill. But she had never seen anything like this. It was the sheer competence, the absolute certainty in every movement, that was so unnerving. He fought like a force of nature, with no wasted energy, no theatrics. Just a pure, undiluted application of violence towards a strategic goal. "You're efficient," she said, the word feeling inadequate. "They were talking too much," was all Naruto said, his gaze sweeping the area for any other threats. The rest of the walk was silent. The easy, probing banter was gone, replaced by a new, more profound respect on Kuroka's part. And a quiet, stoic watchfulness from Naruto. Her nest was the top floor of a derelict pre-war apartment building, condemned and forgotten by the city. The inside was sparse but clean. A mattress on the floor served as a bed, a few crates were arranged as a makeshift table and chairs, and a small pile of blankets sat in a corner. A single window looked out over the glittering, rain-swept expanse of Kuo. It was a transient's hideout, but it was dry, secure, and for now, it was safe. Kuroka tossed him a small, sealed package. Military ration, she said with a shrug. Stole it from a nearby army surplus store. Not exactly gourmet, but it's packed with calories. Naruto caught it, nodding his thanks. They ate in a comfortable silence, the sounds of the city a distant murmur below them. The adrenaline from the fight faded, leaving behind the deep, bone-weary exhaustion. For the first time since he'd arrived, Naruto allowed himself to relax, just a fraction. You never told me your name, Kuroka said softly, breaking the silence. She was curled up on the pile of blankets, watching him with an intensity he was beginning to get used to. He hesitated for a moment, then decided it was a fair trade. Naruto. Naruto, she repeated, tasting the name. Well, Naruto, you fight like no one I've ever seen. What are you? He looked out the window, at the strange lights of this strange world. What was he? He was a shinobi, a Jinchuriki, a hero. But he was also something else now. Something that had erased a god and broken the world. I'm a survivor, he said. The words feeling truer than any other label. Just like you. Kuroka's expression softened. The playful cat, the dangerous stray, the powerful mage, all those masks fell away for a moment, revealing the weary soul beneath. She understood that answer perfectly. She was a survivor, too. Hunted by the devils she'd abandoned, feared for the power she possessed. In this strange, wounded man who fell from the sky, she saw a reflection of herself. A being of immense power, utterly alone. The alliance was no longer just transactional. A new, unspoken clause had been added. It wasn't about protection for information anymore. It was simpler than that. It was the quiet understanding between two outcasts who had finally found another of their kind. In a world full of predators and politics, they had found a small, quiet space where they didn't have to be alone. The alliance, forged in caution and solidified in violence, now rested on a new foundation, a shared, silent vow of you and me against the world. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Devil's Gaze. 2 days. It had been 2 days since Naruto had fallen into this world of steel and neon. For 2 days, the derelict apartment had been a sanctuary. A quiet island in the roaring sea of Kuo. Time moved differently here. In the elemental nations, the passage of time was marked by the sun and moon, the shifting of seasons. Here, it was arced by the endless cycle of headlights painting fleeting patterns on the grimy window and the distant, rhythmic thrum of the city that never truly slept. Naruto spent most of that time in a state of meditative recovery. His body, a vessel that had contained the power of a god, was slowly mending its fractured mortal shell. The deep well of his chakra, once nearly drained dry, was refilling, drop by painstaking drop. Kurama was quiet within him, the great beast's own immense energies focused entirely on the Herculean task of healing his host. The process was slow, frustratingly so. He was used to near instantaneous regeneration, a perk of being a Jinchuriki. But the damage he had sustained wasn't just physical, it was existential. His very soul had been stretched to the breaking point, and that was a wound no amount of chakra could instantly fix. Kuroka was a surprisingly unobtrusive roommate. She would vanish for hours at a time, returning with stolen food, clothing, a pair of simple black cargo pants and a dark gray t-shirt for him that were a welcome change from his tattered shinobi gear, and, most importantly, information. She was his window to this world, and she painted a picture of it with cynical, witty brushstrokes. So the strongest devils are all royalty? Naruto asked, his voice still holding a slight rasp. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his eyes closed in meditation, but his senses were sharp, tracking Kuroka as she paced the room like a caged panther. Royalty, nobles, the blue bloods of the underworld, she confirmed, her tail swishing in agitation. The 72 pillars. Old, powerful families who think their names give them the right to own everything and everyone. They run the whole show. Their system is built on something they call evil pieces, NYA tilde. She had explained it to him the day before. A system created by the devil king Ajuka Beelzebub, allowing high-class devils to reincarnate other beings into their service, binding them into a peerage modeled after the game of chess. 1 king, 1 queen, 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, and 8 pawns. Each piece with a value, a function. It's slavery, Dressed up in a fancy uniform, Naruto stated, his voice flat. He opened his eyes, their blue depths cold. A king who needs to turn others into slaves to build his power isn't a king. He's a parasite. Kuroka stopped pacing and looked at him. A genuine smile touching her lips. I knew I liked you. That's exactly what it is. A gilded cage. They offer you power, a new life, protection, but you're never free. You're just a piece on their board, to be moved and sacrificed as they see fit. That's why I left. Her smile faded, replaced by a familiar shadow of bitterness. My sister. She chose to stay in her cage. The name, Kaneko, had been spoken once, laced with so much pain and love that Naruto didn't press for more. He understood the wounds of a broken sibling bond all too well. While Naruto and Kuroka existed in their isolated bubble, the ripples of their actions were spreading through the city's supernatural underbelly. The 5 broken stray devils had not gone unnoticed. They had been found by low-level Grimoire Patrol, and they're terrified. Rambling story of a golden-eyed man who moved like a phantom and a newly protected Kuroka had quickly made its way up the chain of command. In the Kuo Academy Student Council room, Sona Citri adjusted her glasses. Her violet eyes fixed on the report displayed on her laptop. The room was a model of efficiency, just like its president. Her queen, Tsubaki Shinra, stood at attention beside her. His movements were described as having no wasted energy, Sona murmured, her finger tapping the screen. He neutralized 5 targets, 2 of whom had significant combat experience, in under a minute. He used no discernible magic circle or energy signature that matches any known faction. And he did all this while appearing physically exhausted. A new player, Tsubaki said, her voice calm and even. And a dangerous one, if he's allied himself with Kuroka. Precisely, Sona agreed. Kuroka is an SS-class threat due to her mastery of senjutsu and yujutsu. She is powerful, but she is a known quantity. This man, Naruto, is an anomaly. An unknown variable of immense power appearing in our territory cannot be ignored. For now, we observe. Increase all patrols, but do not engage. I want to know everything about him before we make a single move. The reaction was different across campus, in the much more opulent headquarters of the Occult Research Club. Rias Grimoire lounged on a velvet couch, a cup of tea in her hand, as Akano Himehime relayed the same rumors she'd gathered through her own channels. They say he didn't even flinch when he was attacked, Rias, Akano said. A mischievous twinkle in her violet eyes. He just took them apart. And his declaration, that Kuroka is under his protection. It's quite bold. Rias took a delicate sip of her tea, her crimson hair a fiery cascade over her shoulder. Bold, or foolish, to openly claim a stray of Kuroka's infamy in the territory of 2 pillar heirs. He either has no idea how the world works, or he has the power to make his own rules. Her beautiful face was a mask of thoughtful curiosity. Kaneko has been quiet since she heard the news about her sister. This could become complicated. She placed her cup down with a soft click. Unlike Sona's cautious approach, Rias's instincts screamed for action. An unknown power of this magnitude could not be left to fester. Kiba, Kaneko, she called out. Go and see if you can find them. Be discreet. I want to know who this man is. Meanwhile, another, far less subtle power had just arrived in Kuo. In the city's most expensive hotel, Riser Phoenix served. Eyed his suite with a look of supreme boredom. His peerage, a collection of beautiful and powerful women, stood by, attending to his every whim. The air in the human world is so dreadfully plain, he announced to no one in particular. Running a hand through his blonde hair. Still, business is business. Finalizing the details of my marriage to Rias Grimoire requires my personal attention. She needs to be reminded of the honor she is receiving. One of his knights, Cyrus, bowed. Lord Riser, a rumor has come to our attention. The stray, Kuroka, has been spotted in this city. Riser's bored expression vanished, replaced by a hungry, possessive gleam. Kuroka, here, well now, that is an interesting development. He had long coveted the powerful Nekosho. Her infamy and strength would be a magnificent jewel in the crown of his peerage. They say she is powerful, but flighty. A wild cat that needs to be tamed and collared. Find her. Riser will add another piece to his collection before he returns to the underworld. It took Riser's resources less than a day to track them. He didn't bother with subtlety. He simply followed the trail of whispers and the faint, lingering traces of Kuroka's unique energy. He found them at dusk, sitting on the edge of the condemned building's roof, looking out over the glittering cityscape. Naruto was teaching Kuroka a basic leaf-sticking exercise, a fundamental chakra control practice. Kuroka, whose control over her own energy was immense, was struggling with the foreign nature of chakra, her brow furrowed in concentration as the leaf on her forehead repeatedly fluttered to the ground. It's not about power, it's about balance, Naruto was explaining patiently. Feel the flow, don't force it. Easy for you to say, she grumbled, pouting. My energy likes to explode. It doesn't like to stick. The air suddenly crackled, and the space behind them tore open in a vortex of brilliant orange flames. From the fiery portal emerged Riser Phoenix, Florida. NKED by 4 of his peerage members, his queen Ubeluna, his knight Cyrus, and his rooks, Isabella and Schwalen. Well, how cozy. Riser's voice was slick with arrogance as he stepped onto the roof, the flames dissipating behind him. The infamous Kuroka, reduced to playing games with this creature. Riser is disappointed. Kuroka shot to her feet, her playful frustration replaced by a venomous scowl. Phoenix, I should have known. I smelled something burning and self-important. Naruto rose slowly, his body moving with a fluid calm that belied the sudden tension. He placed himself slightly in front of Kuroka, his eyes taking in the newcomers. He saw the condescending smirk on the blond man's face, the blind adoration in his servant's eyes. He felt the fiery, almost brutish demonic power Riser exuded. It was strong, but it felt unrefined. Like a bonfire next to a controlled fusion reactor. Riser's gaze swept over Naruto with casual dismissal before locking back onto Kuroka. Riser has come to make you a generous offer. Your life as a hunted stray is over. Swear your loyalty to the House of Phoenix. Become my servant, and you will be granted a full pardon, wealth, and more prestige than you could ever dream of. His smile was predatory. All Riser asks for in return is your absolute obedience. Kuroka let out a sharp, derisive laugh. You want me to be your collared pet? I'd rather die in a gutter. Find another toy to play with, you gilded peacock. Riser's smile tightened, a flicker of anger in his eyes. You mistake a command for a request. Riser is not accustomed to being denied. He finally deigned to look at Naruto. And you, whatever gutter you crawled out of, crawl back to it. This does not concern you. Naruto remained silent, his expression unreadable. His cowl, MNESS, seemed to infuriate Riser more than any retort could have. Are you deaf, mongrel? Riser is speaking to you. Naruto's eyes finally met Riser's. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, yet it cut teeth. Harrow the air with the sharpness of shattered glass. You talk about your house, your name, your power. You use them as a shield because you have no strength of your own. The words struck a nerve. Riser's face flushed with anger. How dare you? Riser is a Phoenix. My blood makes me immortal. Immortality is not power, Naruto stated, his gaze unwavering. He had seen true immortality in Kagaya. This was a parlor trick. It's a crutch. It makes you reckless, arrogant, weak. You rely on regeneration because you don't have the skill to avoid being hit in the first place. He took a step forward, his presence seeming to grow. To fill the rooftop. You talk of ownership, but your servants look at you with fear, not loyalty. Fear is brittle. The moment a greater power appears, their loyalty will shatter. Your entire strength is a house of cards, built on a name you didn't earn. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing Riser's inflated ego. Even Kuroka was taken aback by the cold, brutal accuracy of his assessment. He had completely dissected Riser's character in less than a minute. Riser was trembling, not with fear, but with incandescent rage. He had never been spoken to this way. You will die for that insolence. He shrieked, his voice cracking. Ubeluna, Cyrus, kill him, make him suffer. His queen, a woman with purple hair in a revealing outfit, smirked and began to gather a ball of explosive energy in her hands. His knight, a blur of motion, drew her sword and dashed forward. Naruto didn't even look at the knight. He kept his eyes locked on Riser. As Cyrus lunged, her blade aimed for his neck. Naruto simply raised a hand. He caught the blade between two fingers, the enchanted steel screeching to a halt inches from his skin. Cyrus's eyes went wide with shock. With a casual flick of his wrist, he snapped the blade in two and shoved her back, sending her stumbling into Ubeluna. The queen's concentration broke, and her explosive spell fizzled out with a pathetic pop. "Is that the best your peerage can do?" Naruto asked, his voice laced with a dangerous calm. Enraged, Riser's other pieces, the twin rooks, charged forward. They were masters of hand-to-hand combat, their fists glowing with demonic power. Naruto met their charge. He flowed between them like water. He didn't block their punches, he redirected them. With a series of fluid, minimalist movements, he used their own momentum to throw them off balance, twisting them around until they collided with each other, collapsing in a tangled heap of limbs. The entire fight had taken less than 5 seconds. 4 elite members of a high-class Devil's Peerage, neutralized without a single injury dealt, made to look like clumsy children. Humiliation was a far more potent weapon than force. Riser stared, his mouth agape, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His immortality was useless if his opponent couldn't be touched. His peerage was useless if they could be dismantled so effortlessly. From the shadows of a nearby rooftop, 2 figures watched in stunned silence. Hiba Yuto and Kaneko Tuju had arrived just in time to witness the confrontation. "Did you see that?" Hiba breathed, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "His movements, they're perfect. There's no wasted motion." Kaneko said nothing, her heterochromatic eyes wide. She wasn't focused on the fight. She was staring at the man standing protectively in front of her older sister. Back on the rooftop, Riser, his face contorted in a furious snarl, finally realized he couldn't win with a simple brawl. He had to save face. He had to use the rules of their society. "You are strong, mongrel, I will grant you that," he spat, drawing himself up with a sneer. "But brute force means nothing in the face of law and tradition. Riser Phoenix hereby issues a formal challenge. We will settle this in a rating game." His voice boomed with false confidence, the official declaration hanging in the air. "The prize will be this stray cat. When Riser wins, she will become my property, body and soul. If, by some impossible miracle, you win, Riser will renounce all claim to her and never trouble you again." Naruto looked from Riser's arrogant face to Kuroka. He saw the defiance in her eyes, but also the flicker of fear. A rating game was a formal, magically binding duel. To refuse was to show weakness. To accept was to walk into a battlefield of Riser's choosing. Before Naruto could answer, a calm, female voice cut through the tension. "A rating game, Lord Phoenix. That seems a rather extreme response to a simple disagreement." All heads turned. Standing at the edge of the roof, having arrived with silent grace, were Rias Gramori and Akano Himahima. Rias's expression was one of mild disapproval, but her crimson eyes were alight with intense curiosity as she looked at Naruto. At the same time, from a vantage point miles away, perched atop the city's tallest radio tower and utterly invisible to all forms of magical and spiritual detection, the Warden Scout Uriel lowered a crystalline device from its single, unblinking eye. Its ethereal form, a being of silver light and geometric angles, processed the data it had just observed. Less than target designation, Harbinger Prime. Physical combat proficiency exceeds Keter class projections. Tactical acumen, high. Subject displays psychological warfare capabilities. Power source remains dormant, yet residual somatic reinforcement is absolute. The subject is integrating with local anomalous entities. Threat level escalating. Forwarding analysis to High Council. Greater than, the Ward. N thought in a language of pure concept. Asterisk less than recommendation remains unchanged. Purification protocol. Greater than. A sliver of silver light detached from its form and shot into the heavens, faster than any eye could see. Carrying a message that would doom a world. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Echoes of War. The air on the rooftop was thick with the weight of a formal declaration. Riser Phoenix stood preening, his chest puffed out, basking in the perceived glory of having cornered his opponent with the rules of Devil Society. Rias Gramori's expression was a careful blend of aristocratic disapproval and burning curiosity. Her arrival had shifted the power dynamic, but Riser's challenge, once issued, could not be easily rescinded without a massive loss of face. A rating game is the proper venue for settling disputes between nobles, Lord Phoenix. Rias said, her voice smooth as silk but with an underlying edge of steel. However, this man is not a devil. He is not bound by our laws. This is highly irregular. He stands with a stray and defies a pillar house. That makes it my business, Lady Grimori, Riser retorted, his arrogance surging back. He has chosen to involve himself in our world. Now he will face its consequences. Naruto ignored the political maneuvering. His gaze was fixed on Riser, his mind dissecting the challenge. A formal duel in a pocket dimension. A battlefield of his opponent's choosing. It was a trap, but it was also a solution. A decisive, final solution that would end this farce here and now. He had no interest in the politics of this world, but he had every interest in securing Kuroka's peace. If he had to tear down one of their precious nobles to achieve it, so be it. I accept, Naruto said. The words, spoken with such quiet finality, silenced everyone. Riser's smirk widened, believing he had already won. Kuroka's breath hitched, a flicker of genuine fear in her golden eyes. However, Naruto continued, his voice dropping, taking on a hard, non-negotiable edge. I have one condition. He pointed a single, steady finger at Riser. No peerages, no servants or slaves, just you and me. If you are as great as you claim, you won't need to hide behind 15 others to prove it. It was a masterful stroke, turning Riser's own arrogance against him. To refuse would be to admit weakness, to admit that he did need his peerage to win. The challenge was no longer just about Kuroka. It was about Riser's pride. Riser let out a contemptuous laugh. You think you can face Riser alone? You, a nameless mongrel. Very well. Riser accepts your foolish terms. It will make your humiliation all the more exquisite. Riser will personally tear you apart, again and again, until you beg for death. Tomorrow at dusk, Rias interjected, taking control of the situation. The match will be officially sanctioned. My brother will be notified. Until then, Naruto-san, you and Kuroka-san will be my guests. It would not do for there to be any outside interference. Her eyes flickered towards Riser, a clear warning. With a final, hateful glare, Riser and his peerage vanished in another vortex of flame. The tension on the rooftop immediately deflated, leaving behind a nervous silence. Are you insane? Kuroka hissed at Naruto the moment they were alone in the lavish guest room provided for them in the Occult Research Club's building. A rating game, against a Phoenix. Do you have any idea what you've just agreed to? She paced the room, her tails lashing back and forth in agitation. His immortality is the real thing, handsome. You can break his bones, you can rip him to shreds. And he'll just reform from the ashes. His flames can incinerate a mountain. And he won't honor his promise. The moment that game starts, his entire peerage will be on top of you. It's what he does. He's a coward and a cheat. Naruto sat on the edge of the bed, watching her. He saw past the anger, past the frustration, to the raw fear beneath. She was terrified for him. The realization settled in his chest, a strange, warm weight. He waited for her to stop pacing, her frantic energy finally winding down. He reached out and gently took her hand. Her skin was soft, but he could feel the tension thrumming through her. Kuroka, he said, his voice soft but firm. Look at me. She met his gaze, her own golden eyes shimmering with a storm of emotions. Have I given you any reason to doubt me so far? He asked. She opened her mouth to retort, then closed it. He hadn't. He had been calm, decisive, and overwhelmingly competent at every turn. I know he will cheat, Naruto continued. I'm counting on it. I know about his immortality. It doesn't matter. He squeezed her hand gently. This isn't about winning a game. This is about ending a threat. He will not stop hunting you. He sees you as a possession. An object to be owned. I am going to break him so completely that the very thought of you will fill him with terror. I am going to give you your peace. That is a promise. He wasn't boasting. He was stating a fact. With the same certainty one might state that the sun will rise. His absolute, unshakable confidence was a force in itself. It washed over Kuroka, soothing the frantic edges of her fear. She looked at him, at this man who had fallen from another world, who carried a universe of pain in his eyes, and she felt a wave of something so fierce and protective it stole her breath. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. Just come back, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Don't you dare leave me alone in this stupid world, Nya. He brought his other hand up, gently stroking her hair, his thumb brushing against one of her soft cat ears. Never. The next day passed in a blur. The official sanction came down from the underworld. The Lord Lucifer, Circex Grimori, had not only approved the match but had expressed a keen interest in viewing it personally. This raised the stakes from a minor territorial dispute to a high-profile event. As dusk fell, a complex, crimson magic circle glowed to life on the floor of the clubhouse. Rias, Akeno, and the rest of their peerage stood by. Kuroka stood closest to Naruto, her hand gripping his arm tightly, her knuckles white. Ready? Rias asked. Naruto gave a single, sharp nod. The light of the magic circle intensified, engulfing him in a pillar of crimson energy. The sensation was one of being disassembled and reassembled molecule by molecule. When his vision cleared, he was no longer in the clubhouse. He stood in the center of a vast, magically constructed dimension. It was a perfect replica of a ruined city, eerily similar to the war-torn landscapes of his own world. Shattered skyscrapers clawed at a bruised purple sky, and rubble-strewn streets wound through the urban canyons. It was a battlefield. A holographic screen shimmered into existence high in the air, showing the spectators. He could see Rias's peerage, Sona Cetres, and two figures seated on throne-like chairs, a Han. Some man with crimson hair identical to Rias's, Circex, and a beautiful woman in a maid's uniform beside him, Graphia Lucifuge. They all wore expressions of intense curiosity. Across the ruined plaza, another pillar of light deposited Riser Phoenix. He was clad in ornate golden armor, a condescending smirk plastered on his face. Welcome to your grave, mongrel, Riser announced, his voice booming through the arena. Did you truly believe Riser would honor a promise made to someone of your station? On cue, 14 more magic circles flared to life around him. From them emerged his entire peerage, fully armed and armored. They moved into formation, a wall of 15 powerful devils surrounding a single, isolated man. Ubeluna floated into the air, balls of explosive energy already forming in her hands. The knights drew their swords, the rooks cracked their knuckles. In the viewing area, Rias gasped. He cheated. I knew he would. Circex leaned forward in his throne, his relaxed demeanor gone, replaced by a sharp, analytical focus. So this is the man, he murmured to Graphia. Let us see what he is truly made of. Kuroka's claws dug into the arm of the chair she was gripping, her face pale with fury and fear. In the arena, Naruto's reaction was not one of shock or anger. It was one of quiet, profound disappointment. A deep sigh escaped his lips. I was hoping you'd have at least a shred of honor, he said. His voice quiet but carrying clearly across the plaza. I guess I expected too much. Riser laughed. Honor is for equals. You are nothing. Now, suffer. He swept his arm forward. Destroy him. His peerage surged forward. A volley of spells, arrows, and physical attacks converged on Naruto from all sides. And then, Naruto decided to stop holding back. The air in the arena changed. It was not a drop in temperature, but a drop in everything else. Hope, courage, the will to fight, a pressure, ancient and absolute, descended upon the battlefield. Naruto closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, they were blazing with a white-hot, internal light. The air around him shimmered, and the golden armor of the horseman of war solidified into existence over his clothes. It was not the gaudy, decorative armor of Riser, but a sleek, functional masterpiece of ethereal metal, etched with black, swirling patterns that seemed to absorb the very light around them. 9 black rings, like miniature black holes, materialized, hovering silently behind him. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The spells and arrows that were about to hit him dissolved in midair, their magical structure unraveling under the sheer conceptual weight of his presence. The charging knights and rooks froze in their tracks, their bodies suddenly feeling as heavy as lead. It was not a paralysis spell. It was the primal, instinctual terror of a prey animal facing an apex predator that had just revealed its true form. Their fighting spirit, the very thing that fueled a warrior, was being systematically crushed. The weaker pawns at the back of the formation simply collapsed, their minds overloaded, falling unconscious without a single blow being struck. What is this pressure? Yubeluna stammered from the air, her own powerful magic sputtering. Naruto took a step forward. The sound of his armored boot on the pavement was the only sound in the silent arena. He moved towards the terrified wall of devils, his pace unhurried. He was no longer just a man. He was the personification of conflict, the living embodiment of war itself. Cyrus, Riser's head knight, grit her teeth, forcing herself to move through the suffocating aura. For Lord Riser, she screamed, more to convince herself than her comrades, and lunged forward. Naruto didn't even seem to notice her. He continued his slow walk, and Cyrus's desperate charge simply failed. She ran into an invisible wall of sheer intent, her momentum vanishing, her blade falling from her nerveless fingers to clatter on the ground. She stared at him, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it bordered on madness. He had defeated her without a single touch. He walked past her, his gaze fixed on Riser. The remaining peerage members scrambled to get in his way, to protect their master. It was futile. He moved through them as a river moves through reeds. A gesture of his hand sent the twin rooks flying, their martial prowess utterly negated. A cold glance snuffed out Yubeluna's flames, causing her to cry out in shock and fall from the sky. He wasn't fighting them. He was dismissing them. In less than a minute, he had walked a straight path through Riser's entire guard, leaving behind a trail of broken wills and unconscious bodies. Only he and Riser remained standing. Riser was trembling, his arrogant smirk long gone, replaced by a mask of disbelief and panic. "What are you?" he shrieked. "Your end." Naruto's voice was not his own. It was a cold, resonant echo, the sound of 1,000 battlefields and 1,000,000 dying cries. Panicked, Riser unleashed his ultimate attack. A torrent of golden fire, the legendary flames of the Phoenix clan that could turn anything to ash, erupted from his body, consuming the entire plaza in a roaring inferno. In the viewing area, everyone leaned forward, their hearts pounding. Kuroka was on her feet, her hands pressed against the screen. The flames cleared. Naruto stood in the exact same spot, completely untouched, his ethereal armor not even scorched. He had walked through the inferno as if it were a gentle spring breeze. He took the final few steps until he was inches from Riser, the height difference making him seem like a looming titan. He reached out and grabbed Riser by the throat, lifting the armored devil off his feet with one hand. "Impossible!" Riser choked, his hands clawing uselessly at Naruto's unyielding grip. Naruto's armored fist shot out, shattering the ornate breastplate of Riser's armor and the ribs beneath. Riser screamed in pain, a sound that was abruptly cut off as his body dissolved into ashes, his regeneration kicking in. The ashes swirled and began to reform a few feet away. Before the process was even complete, Naruto was there. He grabbed the half-formed Riser and slammed him into the ground, creating a crater in the pavement. Again, Riser's body dissolved. Again, Naruto was waiting for him. "You can heal your body," Naruto's cold, echoing voice stated as he casually broke Riser's newly formed arm. The snap was sickeningly loud. "But your mind is not so resilient. Your spirit is not immortal." He broke the other arm. "How many times can you break before you stay broken forever?" He continued the process, a terrifying, systematic cycle of destruction. He wasn't just hurting Riser, he was teaching him the meaning of absolute despair. With every forced regeneration, a piece of Riser's arrogant spirit was flaking away, replaced by pure, undiluted terror. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Naruto let the blubbering, weeping Riser fully reform. He leaned in close, his helmeted face inches from Riser's terrified one. He whispered something, his words inaudible to the spectators, a message meant only for the broken devil. Riser's eyes went wide, the last vestiges of his sanity shattering. A piercing, animalistic scream of pure terror tore from his throat. I forfeit. Get him away from me." The automated voice of the rating game system echoed through the silent arena. "Lord Phoenix has resigned. The winner is Naruto Uzumaki." The game ended. The ruined city dimension dissolved. Naruto was back in the clubhouse, the golden armor dissipating like smoke, leaving him standing in his simple clothes. The immense pressure vanished, and the room could breathe again. He looked pale, exhausted, the power having taken a visible toll. The eyes of everyone in the room, Rias, Searzex, Sona, were fixed on him, filled with a mixture of awe, respect, and a healthy dose of fear. But Naruto didn't see them. His eyes sought out only one person. Kuroka rushed forward, ignoring the stunned devil lords and their peerages. She didn't congratulate him or ask what had happened. She simply reached him, her hands coming up to cup his face, her thumbs gently stroking his cheeks. She could see the cold emptiness in his eyes, the echo of the terrifying power he had just wielded. Feel the tremors running through his body. He leaned into her touch, his own hands coming up to cover hers, his eyes closing. Her presence was an anchor, pulling him back from the cold, brutal abyss of the entity he had become. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't in awe of his power. She was just there, grounding him, healing the part of him that his own power had wounded. In the silent space between them, a bond deeper than any alliance was forged in the fires of his apocalyptic power. Miles away, at the apex of the Kuo City radio tower, the Warden Scout Uriel was dying. The flare of conceptual energy from the raiding game dimension had been a psychic nuke. Its backlash had overwhelmed his physical form. His body of silver light was flickering, destabilizing, burning away into cosmic static. With the last of its consciousness, it sent its final, desperate message across the dimensions to the Warden High Council. Less than warning. Harbinger Prime has unsealed a conceptual state, war. Our level exceeds all known projections. Containment protocols are insufficient. Entity is an active, evolving catastrophe. Recommend immediate purification protocol. Greater than. The last packet of information was sent. Uriel's form then imploded in a silent flash, vaporizing into nothingness, leaving the top of the radio tower empty, as if it had never been there at all. The message had been sent. Judgment was coming. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Dark. The silence in the Occult Research Club's main room was a physical entity, heavier and more suffocating than the conceptual pressure Naruto had just unleashed. Everyone stared at him, their expressions a cocktail of raw, undiluted awe and a deep, instinctual fear. They hadn't just watched a fight, they had witnessed a fundamental law of their universe, the invincibility of a phoenix, be systematically and contemptuously broken. They had seen a god of their world reduced to a whimpering child. Searzex Lucifer was the first to break the spell. He rose from his throne-like chair, not with the haste of a man alarmed, but with the deliberate, fluid grace of a being whose power was so absolute he never needed to hurry. The air around shimmered with a crimson energy that made Naruto's senses tingle, a power that felt as vast and deep as an ocean. Kurama, dormant until now, stirred within him, a low growl rumbling in the back of his mind. Careful, Kit, this one is different. Rias, Sona, everyone, Searzex said, his voice calm and pleasant, yet carrying an authority that was absolute. Please leave us. Graphia and I would like to speak with our guests. Alone. There was no room for argument. Rias and Sona exchanged a look, then bowed their heads in assent. One by one, their peerages filed out of the room, their gazes lingering on Naruto as they left. Kiba offered a nod of profound respect. Kaniko's mismatched eyes lingered on her sister, a complex storm of emotions swirling within them, before she too departed. Soon, only four remained: Searzex, his silver-haired queen, Graphia Lucifuge, and across from them, Naruto and Kuroka. Kuroka had not let go of Naruto, her hand still resting on his arm, a silent, defiant anchor. Searzex smiled, a disarmingly warm expression that did not quite reach his eyes. First, allow me to offer my gratitude, Naruto-san. The matter of Riser Phoenix's arrogance has been a persistent annoyance. You have handled the situation with a certain finality. The Phoenix family will be lodging a formal complaint, of course, but given the number of witnesses to Riser's dishonorable conduct, it will amount to nothing. It was a masterful political move, instantly framing Naruto not as a disruptive intruder, but as someone who had done the Grimoire family, and by extension the Devil faction, a service. Naruto simply nodded, his energy still focused on recovery. He was in the presence of a true heavyweight, and he would not show weakness. That being said, Searzex continued, his tone becoming more serious. The pleasantries falling away to reveal the steel beneath. Your display in the arena was unprecedented. That was not demonic energy. It was not holy power, nor was it senjutsu as we know it. So, I must ask the question that is on everyone's mind. What are you? The question hung in the air, a tangible weight. Graphia's gaze was like a shard of ice, her analytical eyes missing nothing. Her power held in a state of perfect, lethal readiness. Naruto met the Devil King's gaze without flinching. He could feel Kuroka's subtle tension beside him, a silent warning. He chose his words carefully. I am from another world. A world that was dying. I came here by accident, and I mean your world no harm. And the power you used. Sears pressed gently. It's a part of me, Naruto said, his voice flat. It only comes out when it has to. It was the truest, simplest explanation he could offer. Sears studied him for a long, silent moment, his crimson eyes seeming to peer into Naruto's very soul. He was searching for deception, for malice, for ambition. He found none. He found only a deep, profound weariness, and a fierce, unyielding protectiveness for the woman beside him. He came to a decision. Forcing the issue with a being of this magnitude would be foolish. An alliance, or at least a peaceful coexistence, was the only logical path. Very well, Sears said, his warm smile returning. This time with a hint of genuine sincerity. A new piece has appeared on the board, one with the power to overturn it completely. I have no wish to be your enemy, Naruto-san. So I will make you an offer. He turned his gaze to Kuroka. Kuroka, for your past crimes against your former master, crimes which, in light of his now well-documented depravities, seem more and more justified, I, Sears Lucifer, in my capacity as a great Satan, offer you a full and unconditional pardon. You are no longer designated a stray. You are free. Kuroka's eyes widened, her ears flattening against her head in shock. She stared at the Devil King, speechless. Years. She had been on the run for years, hunted, vilified, always looking over her shoulder. And just like that, it was over. Sears then looked back to Naruto. In exchange for this, and a guarantee of non-interference from all factions under my authority, I ask for two things. First, your neutrality. We have enough enemies without inviting the wrath of a being like you. Second, should a threat arise that endangers us all, I ask that you consider lending us your strength. It was far more than a fair offer. It was a massive concession. He was treating Naruto not as a subject, but as a fellow monarch, an equal power to be negotiated with. Naruto looked at Kuroka, saw the tears welling in her eyes, the hope, the disbelief. He had promised her peace. Sears had just offered it on a silver platter. We accept, Naruto said. The news of what had transpired in the raiding game spread through the supernatural world with the speed of a shockwave. In Grigori, the headquarters of the fallen angels, Azazel laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed through his research lab. He did what? He roared, leaning back in his chair, surrounded by holographic screens displaying data from the match. He psychologically broke a phoenix to the point of surrender. Glorious. Absolutely glorious. His initial curiosity had blossomed into full-blown fascination. A new energy source, a power that works on a conceptual level. I have to meet this boy. This is more exciting than any sacred gear research I've done in a century. In a shadowed castle, the Chaos Brigade was abuzz. A young man with silver hair and dragon-like wings, Valley Lucifer, watched a recording of the fight, a predatory grin on his face. So, a new player has arrived, he murmured to the large, armored ape-like being beside him. His power is immense, raw. He could be a worthy rival. But others in the brigade were not so enthused. In a hidden temple in the mountains of Japan, a handsome young man in a traditional hakama, Sao, frowned as he listened to a report from one of his subordinates. As the current wielder of the true Longinus, the spear that pierced the side of Christ, he was the leader of the hero faction. His goal was to protect humanity from the whims of gods, devils, and dragons. An unknown entity with reality-defying power has allied itself with an SS-class stray and is now operating under the protection of a Devil King, Sao summarized, his expression grim. He is an anomaly, a variable we cannot predict or control. He is too dangerous to be left alone. His eyes hardened. He is a monster cloaked in human skin. And we, as heroes, have a duty to slay monsters. Prepare the spear. I will handle this myself. Naruto and Kuroka returned to their derelict apartment, the lavish guest room of the Grimoire clan feeling too much like a cage. Their own shabby nest felt more like home. The reality of her pardon was still sinking in for Kuroka. She moved about the room with a strange, new lightness, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Free," she whispered, looking out the window at the city lights. "I don't even know what that feels like anymore." "You'll get used to it," Naruto said from his spot on the mattress. He was still recovering. The use of the war aspect had taken a deeper toll than he'd let on, leaving a cold, hollow ache in his soul. She turned to him, her golden eyes soft. "This is because of you. You did this for me." Before he could respond, she was there, kneeling in front of him. She leaned in and pressed a soft, gentle kiss to his lips. It wasn't the teasing, provocative gesture of before. It was tender, full of a gratitude and affection that ran deeper than words. It lasted only a moment, but it sent a jolt of warmth through Naruto's entire being, chasing away some of the coldness. She pulled back, a faint blush on her cheeks. "Thank you, Naruto." He was about to reply when his senses screamed. A presence, impossibly fast, impossibly sharp. It was not demonic, not holy in the way the church had felt. It was something else, pure, concentrated, and utterly lethal. The wall of the apartment exploded inward. A figure stood silhouetted against the night sky, clad in the simple attire of a traveling priest, but holding a magnificent, glowing spear of pure golden light. The pressure emanating from the weapon was immense, making the very air vibrate. "Sao Sao, Naruto Uzumaki," the man said, his voice polite but cold as a winter grave. "On behalf of humanity, I am here to eliminate you." He didn't wait for an answer. He lunged. The speed was incredible, faster than even the rakeage. The tip of the true Longinus was a blur of golden light aimed directly at Naruto's heart. Naruto's instincts took over. He threw himself and Kuroka to the side, the spear missing him by a hair's breadth. It pierced the floor, and the holy energy it released vaporized. A 10-foot section of the concrete as if it had never existed. "Kuroka, get back," Naruto yelled, shoving her towards the far side of the room. He faced the attacker, his eyes narrowed. This was no brute like Riser. This was an assassin, a specialist of the highest order. The spear he held, it felt like death. Cao Cao smiled, a thin, cold expression. "You are fast, but you cannot dodge forever." He launched into a flurry of attacks. Each thrust of the spear a perfectly aimed, lethal strike. Naruto was forced purely on the defensive, his body, still recovering, pushed to its absolute limits. He was weaving, dodging, parrying the spear shaft with his bare hands, the holy energy scorching his skin with every block. He needed more power. He reached for the war aspect, but it was sluggish, weary. Like trying to start a cold engine. He wasn't in a state of desperation. He was in a state of exhaustion, and the power wouldn't respond as quickly. That was the opening Cao Cao needed. With a feint, he changed the angle of his attack, the spear's point tearing through Naruto's shoulder. Pain, white-hot and absolute, erupted through Naruto. But it was more than just a physical wound. The spear was not just a sharp piece of metal. It was a conceptual weapon. The moment it pierced his skin, he felt something essential being pulled out of him. His chakra, his life force, his connection to Kurama, it was all being siphoned away. Drawn into the holy weapon. "My true Longinus has the power to kill gods," Cao Cao explained, his voice calm as he pushed the spear deeper. "A mysterious beast like you stands no chance. Just accept your end." Naruto's vision began to blur. His strength was fading at an alarming rate. He was dying. Kurama was roaring in his mind, trying to flood him with healing chakra. But it was being drained as fast as it could be supplied. Desperation. A cold, black, gnawing desperation took hold. He was not going to die here. He had made a promise. He would not leave Kuroka alone. This desperation was the key. As the last of his strength seemed to ebb away, another ancient lock deep within his soul turned with a sickening click. The change was instantaneous. The aggressive, outward pressure of war was gone. In its place, a terrifying absence bloomed. The air in the room grew unnaturally cold. The moonlight streaming through the shattered walls seemed to dim, as if it were being consumed. Naruto, impaled on the god-killing spear, ceased to radiate power. Instead, He began to absorb it. Cao Cao's eyes widened in shock. The flow of energy reversed. The true Longinus, a weapon of ultimate holy power, began to flicker. The golden light was being siphoned out of it, drawn into the wound it had created. Naruto was not just taking back his own energy, he was consuming the spears. "What is this?" Cao Cao yelled, trying to pull his weapon free. But it was stuck, held fast by a force that felt like a black hole. He could feel his own strength being drained. His stamina, the energy that powered his sacred gear, his very life force, it was all being leached away, drawn into the vortex that was Naruto. Naruto's head lifted, his eyes opening. They were no longer blue. They were black pits of absolute emptiness, radiating an aura of profound, soul-crushing hunger. The wound in his shoulder sealed, not with healing chakra, but by simply pulling the flesh back together, leaving no scar. This was the horseman of famine. He grabbed the shaft of the spear with one hand. His grip was like iron. With his other hand, he grabbed Cao Cao's wrist. The assassin cried out as he felt the draining effect intensify, his body growing weak and sluggish, his muscles withering. Naruto won the battle not with a final, mighty blow, but with a quiet, terrifying attrition. He simply held on, draining his opponent until Cao Cao was a trembling, powerless husk. With a final, desperate surge of will, Cao Cao was forced to relinquish his grip on the true Longinus, Yusin. A hidden technique to create a burst of spatial distortion and teleport away in a flash of light, leaving his ultimate weapon behind. Naruto stood there, the empty blackness in his eyes slowly receding back to blue. He looked at the golden spear in his hand, then let it clatter to the floor. The cold aura vanished, and he staggered, catching himself on the wall. The new power had saved him, but the experience had left him feeling hollowed out, scoured clean from the inside. Kuroka rushed to his side, her face a mask of terror. She had watched the entire thing, helpless. She had seen him impaled, dying. And then she had seen him become that thing. A being of pure, horrifying emptiness. She put her arms around him, holding him tightly. She was shaking. This was so much worse than the overwhelming power of war. That had been the fury of a god. This was the chilling hunger of the void. She was afraid, not of him, but for him. She could feel that his power was not a tool he wielded, but a series of desperate survival instincts. These apocalyptic forces were a part of his soul, waking only when he was on the verge of annihilation. She held him tighter, burying her face in his chest. She had just been granted her freedom, her peace. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that for the man who had given it to her, peace would be a very, very long time coming. In a distant realm of unbearable light and perfect geometry, a council of beings made of solidified concept reviewed the final report of their scout, Uriel. Less than. Conceptual state. War. Power level exceeds projections. Recommend immediate purification. Greater than. One of the figures, brighter and more complex than the others, issued a command that was not spoken, but simply became universal law. Less than the Harbinger evolves. The risk of a cascade event is unacceptable. Assemble the extermination phalanx. The Arch-Warden Zerachiel will lead them. Their objective is not containment. It is the complete and total eradication of the anomaly and the corrupted world it now inhabits. Greater than. A host of silver, angelic warriors, their faces impassive masks of divine duty, began to assemble. Judgment was no longer coming. It was on its way. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The weight of a crown. The true Longinus lay on the floorboards of the derelict apartment, a sliver of captured starlight in the gloom. It did not radiate heat or an aggressive aura. Its power was a cold, constant, and absolute presence. It was a weapon designed with a single, divine purpose, to end things. Naruto stared at it, the hollow, scoured feeling left by the famine aspect slowly receding, replaced by a weary ache. The wound in his shoulder was gone without a trace, but he could still feel the phantom sensation of his life force being torn away. Kuroka finished wrapping a cool, damp cloth around his forehead, her touch gentle. Her playful flirtatiousness had been burned away by the night's events, leaving behind a raw, fierce concern. She had seen him wield the overwhelming force of a conquering army, and now she had seen him become a walking, hungry void. The two halves formed a terrifying whole, and she was beginning to understand that the man caught between them was in more danger than anyone he fought. "What do we do with that?" she asked, her voice a low murmur as she gestured with her chin towards the spear. "That's not just some magical trinket, Naruto. That's one of the 13 Longinus. A weapon that can kill God. The factions will tear the world apart to get their hands on it." He knew she was right. The spear was a source of ultimate power. And therefore, ultimate conflict. It was a crown no one could wear without becoming a target. "We can't keep it," he said, his voice rough. "And we can't destroy it. Leaving it here would be inviting an army to our doorstep." Before they could debate further, the air in the room shimmered. 2 distinct, intricate magic circles materialized in midair. One was the familiar, elegant crimson of the House of Grimoire. The other was a complex, dark purple design, etched with geometric patterns and what looked like stylized feathers. From the Grimoire circle, a sealed letter bearing a regal wax seal floated out. From the other, a small, black-feathered imp with mischievous green eyes popped into existence, holding a simple, rolled-up scroll. The imp bowed with a flourish. "A message for the new top dogs of Kuo, from the esteemed governor of the fallen angels, Azazel." It chirped, its voice like grinding pebbles. It tossed the scroll towards Naruto before vanishing in a puff of purple smoke. Kuroka cautiously picked up the scroll and the letter. She broke the Grimoire seal first. It was a formal, urgent summons from Searsex, expressing grave concern over the attack and requesting an immediate meeting to discuss the unacceptable breach of their agreement. It was a political demand wrapped in the language of concern. She then unrolled the scroll from Azazel. The writing was a messy, excited scrawl. "Heard you had a run-in with the hero faction's top brat and came out on top. Heard you relieved him of his pointy stick. I have so many questions. I know things. You want to know what you're up against and what that toy can really do. Come have a chat. I'll bring the good booze." Kuroka looked from the formal invitation to the casual, probing message. "Searsex and Azazel," she breathed, a grim understanding dawning on her face. "The Devil King and the leader of the fallen. You didn't just make ripples, handsome. You caused a tsunami. This changes everything." She began to pace, her mind racing. "Searsex is offering the protection of the establishment. He'll want to fold you into his power structure, make you a formal ally, a piece on his board he can control. It's the safe option, the gilded cage. Azazel, he's a wild card. He's obsessed with knowledge, with sacred gears and powerful phenomena. He doesn't want to control you, he wants to study you like a fascinating new bug. He's more dangerous in some ways, but he values freedom more than Searsex does." Naruto listened, absorbing the information. He was no longer a stranger reacting to events. He was a player, whether he wanted to be or not. The power he held, and the weapon now in his possession, had made him one. "We don't choose a side," he said, his voice regaining its strength and certainty. "We make our own." He stood up, his gaze clear and decisive. "We'll meet them, both of them, at the same time, on neutral ground. They want to talk to the new power in town. Then they'll do it on our terms." His decisiveness was magnetic. Kuroka stopped pacing and a slow, proud smile spread across her face. This was the man she had allied herself with. Not just a vessel of apocalyptic power, but a leader with the will to command it. "On our terms," she purred, the sound full of her old confidence. "I like the sound of that." Negotiations were handled through Graphia, with Kuroka acting as their official envoy. The two faction leaders, their curiosity piqued by Naruto's bold demand, agreed. The neutral ground was established. A featureless, gray pocket dimension, a blank slate where no side held an advantage. Naruto and Kuroka arrived to find Searsex and Azazel already waiting. The Devil King was the picture of relaxed, regal charisma, while the fallen angel governor was sprawled in a conjured armchair. Looking more like a bored rock star than a faction leader with his leather jacket and spiky black hair. Naruto carried the true Longinus, not wielding it, but holding it respectfully. Its golden light seeming muted in the gray dimension. "Naruto-san," Searsex greeted him with a warm smile. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I must again apologize for the attack on you in my sister's domain. The Chaos Brigade will pay for their audacity." Don't worry about it," Azazel chimed in, waving a lazy hand. Cao Cao's always been an arrogant prick. I'm more interested in how you beat him. And his spear. May I? He gestured to the Longinus with greedy, sparkling eyes. Naruto planted the butt of the spear on the ground, its tip level with his head. Message was clear. This was his to control. First, we talk. Then, we see. The summit began. Circex, as expected, offered a formal alliance. Naruto and Kuroka would be granted titles, lands in the underworld, and the full military backing of the devil faction. They would be nobles, with all the power and prestige that entailed. In return, they would be bound to the Grimoire family and answer his call when needed. It was the gilded cage Kuroka had predicted. Azazel's offer was far different. Forget all that stuffy nonsense, he said with a scoff. Titles, land, it's all just a chain to keep you tied down. I'm offering you knowledge. My organization, Grigori, has the most extensive database on sacred gears, magical phenomena, and world mythology in existence. I can tell you what you're fighting, what you are. All I ask in return is that you let me study you. No strings, no chains. Just a free exchange of information. It was the temptation of understanding. Naruto listened patiently to both offers. His expression unreadable. Kuroka stood beside him, her presence a silent statement of solidarity. When they had finished, Naruto looked from the Devil King to the fallen angel governor. You both see us as a tool, he stated, his voice calm and direct. Circex, you see a powerful weapon to stabilize your kingdom and keep your enemies in check. Azazel, you see a fascinating specimen to be dissected for knowledge. You are both mistaken. He stepped forward, his presence filling the empty dimension. He was no longer a confused refugee from another world. He was a power in his own right. And he spoke with the weight of that truth. We will not be your sword, and we will not be your experiment. We are an independent faction. He let the words sink in. Kuroka's pardon stands. We will remain neutral in the conflicts between the three factions. We will not be your enemies, but we will not be your allies either. Cirzex's smile became a little more strained. Azazel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. And the spear? Azazel asked, getting to the heart of the matter. The spear is a declaration of war waiting to happen, Naruto said. We don't want it, so, I will give it to you, Azazel. Azazel sat bolt upright, his lazy demeanor vanishing. You just give me the true Longinus. I will entrust it to your care, Naruto corrected him. For research and safekeeping. In return, Grigori will owe us a debt. You will provide us with any information we require, and you will vow to never use your knowledge of my abilities against me or Kuroka. As for you, Circex, Inritu, RN for removing this destabilizing weapon from your territory, your previous guarantee of non-interference will now be an unbreakable vow. We are to be left alone. That is our price. The two leaders stared at him. He had played them perfectly. He had used their own desires, Azazel's for knowledge, Cirzex's for stability, to get exactly what he wanted, true, recognized independence. He wasn't just a powerhouse, he was a politician. A king in the making. After a long, tense moment, Azazel began to laugh, a genuine, booming sound of appreciation. I'll be damned. The kid's got balls. You've got a deal, Naruto. The true Longinus in exchange for the friendship and resources of Grigori. Done. Circex, seeing the political landscape shift before his eyes, gave a graceful nod. Your terms are acceptable. The underworld will officially recognize you and Kuroka as a neutral party and will honor your autonomy. Naruto tossed the spear to Azazel, who caught it with the reverence of a scholar finding a lost holy text. The summit was over. Naruto had arrived as a mysterious refugee. He was leaving as a king without a kingdom, a recognized power on the world stage. Later that night, back in the quiet sanctuary of their apartment, the weight of the day's events finally settled. They were free. They were safe from the major powers. They had a place in this world, one they had carved out for themselves. The pressure, the constant threat, had eased for the first time. In the silence, they simply looked at each other. All the politics, the battles, the monstrous powers, faded away, leaving just the two of them in the moonlight. You were amazing, Kuroka whispered, her voice full of genuine awe. You faced down two of the most powerful beings in the world and made them play by your rules. I had a good advisor. Naruto replied, a small, tired smile on his face. He looked at her, at the woman who had found him bleeding in an alley, who had trusted him, advised him, and stood by him without question. Kuroka. I'm not sure what I am anymore. A shinobi, a Jinchuriki, this thing with the powers, it's a mess. He looked down at his hands. But the only time it makes any sense, only time any of this feels real or worth fighting for, is when I'm with you. Without you, I'm just a monster waiting for the next catastrophe. You're my anchor. Tears welled in Kuroka's eyes. She reached out, her hand gently touching his cheek. Her thumb stroked his whisker marks, the last vestige of the boy he used to be. I was an outcast my whole life, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Then I became a traitor. A monster in the stories they tell to scare young devils. Everyone has always looked at me and seen a weapon, a prize, or a beast to be put down. She leaned closer, her golden eyes searching his. You've never once looked at me like that. You see me, and I see you, Naruto. The man, not the monster. And I love him. The confession, raw and honest, hung between them. Naruto's breath caught in his throat. He leaned in, closing the small distance between them, and kissed her. It was a kiss of profound gratitude, of shared burdens, of a love forged in the crucible of two worlds. It was a silent vow, more binding than any treaty with gods or kings. They were no longer just allies. They were partners, a faction of two, their bond the foundation of their new life. It was a perfect, peaceful moment. And then the sky broke. It did not tear or shatter. The very fabric of reality above Kuo City began to crack, like a flawless pane of glass struck by an invisible hammer. Ethereal, silver light bled through the fissures, casting the city in a cold, sterile twilight. A pressure descended, utterly alien, a suffocating aura of pure, unyielding, divine order. As the feeling of a judge passing an immutable sentence. From a massive, silver tear in the sky, 6 figures descended. They were beings of light and armor, their forms both beautiful and terrifyingly inhuman. The one in the lead, larger and more ornate than the others, radiated a power that made Searsex's feel like a candle in a supernova. This was the Arch-Warden Zerachiel. His voice, when it came, was not a sound. It was a concept, imprinted on the minds of every supernatural being in the city, from the mightiest devil to the lowliest familiar. In the name of cosmic stability, the harbinger of the end is to be surrendered for purification. All who interfere will be deemed complicit in reality's corruption and will be cleansed. The ultimatum was absolute. The peace they had just won had lasted less than an hour. Judgment had arrived. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Celestial Judgment. The Arch-Warden's ultimatum was a psychic shockwave that ripped through Kuo's supernatural community. It was not a boast or a threat. It was a pronouncement of cosmic law, delivered with the chilling finality of a headsman's axe. In the Occult Research Club, the teacup in Rias Grimori's hand shattered. Its fragments clattering to the floor unnoticed. Her entire peerage was frozen, their faces pale, the sheer, suffocating pressure of the beings in the sky making it difficult to breathe. In the student council room, Sona Citri's tactical mind, usually a whirlwind of plans and contingencies, went utterly blank for a full 3 seconds. This was a scenario for which there was no protocol. Across the supernatural world, the effect was the same. In the underworld, Searsex's Lucifer shot to his feet, the wine glass in his hand turning to dust. His crimson aura of destruction flared, not in aggression, but in a helpless, frustrated response to a power that dwarfed his own. In Grigori, Azazel's lazy smirk vanished. He dropped the true Longinus onto a workbench and stared at his sensor readings, his eyes wide with a mixture of scientific awe and absolute dread. And in the highest echelons of heaven, the Archangel Michael felt the arrival of the Wardens as a discordant, terrifying note in the sea. A celestial symphony, a presence of order so absolute it bordered on tyranny. For Naruto and Kuroka, standing on the rooftop of their derelict home, the ultimatum was not a distant threat. It was a physical presence, a crushing weight that sought to bring them to their knees. The 6 beings of silver light and divine geometry hung in the sky, silent and implacable, their collective aura bleaching the color from the world. There was no time for a strategic discussion, no room for debate. Naruto looked at Kuroka, whose golden eyes were wide with a terror that made his heart clench. He had promised her peace, and instead, he had brought an apocalypse to her doorstep. His jaw tightened with grim resolve. He would not let this city, her home, become a casualty of his existence. Kuroka saw the look in his eyes. She saw the guilt, the determination, the unwavering will. Her fear did not vanish, but it was overshadowed by something stronger. She had chosen her side. She had chosen him. Her tails swished once, a sign of readiness. And she gave him a sharp, single nod. Their faction of two would not surrender. Zerachiel did not wait for a formal reply. Their defiance was answer enough. With a stir that was utterly devoid of flourish, he and his extermination phalanx descended. Their attack was not a chaotic blast of energy, but a symphony of synchronized, tactical annihilation. It was terrifying in its perfection. The warden designated as the anchor was the first to act. It raised a hand, and a shimmering, translucent field of silver light expanded, enveloping the entire city block. Within this zone, the very laws of magic were rewritten. Kuroka gasped as she felt her connection to her demonic yujutsu and the natural energy of senjutsu snuff out, leaving her with only her physical abilities. Then came the hunter. The space between the wardens and the rooftop warped, and the hyper-fast being was suddenly there, its movements not a blur but a series of instantaneous displacements. Its silver blade, humming with spatial energy, slashed not at Naruto, but at the roof beneath his feet, intending to sever his foundation. Naruto reacted on pure instinct, grabbing Kuroka and leaping into the air as the rooftop was carved into pieces. But the hunter was relentless, its attacks severing their escape routes, forcing them into a predetermined kill zone. As they were funneled, the censor, a slender being whose helmet was a smooth, featureless mirror, made its move. It didn't attack their bodies, it attacked their minds. A wave of psychic static washed over Naruto, and for a terrifying second, he was no longer in Kuo. He was back in the ruins of the war, watching Sasuke die, hearing Sakura's screams, the weight of his failure a crushing physical force. He grunted, shaking his head to clear the illusion. But the emotional wound it left was real. The purifier, wreathed in white-hot flames of pure order, unleashed a torrent of fire that sought to unmake the very air they breathed. Naruto flared his chakra, a protective cloak of Kurama's energy erupting to shield them, but the celestial flames corroded it, eating away at the demonic energy with frightening speed. The entire coordinated assault took less than 5 seconds. It was designed to overwhelm, disorient, and annihilate. And guarding Zerachiel himself was the bulwark, a massive, silent warden who created a shield of interlocking hexagonal force fields. It was the linchpin of their perfect defense. This is not a battle you can win, Harbinger, Zerachiel's voice echoed in their minds, calm and detached. Your existence is a chaotic variable. We are the solution. Surrender and your end will be swift. Naruto landed on the street below, the pavement cracking under the impact. He shoved Kuroka behind him, his body tensing. He reached for the overwhelming power of the war aspect. The ethereal armor began to form, the immense pressure descending. He had crushed Riser's entire peerage with this pressure alone. It had no effect on the wardens. They were beings of pure concept and divine duty. They had no fear to be broken, no morale to be shattered. They were simply a function of the universe, and his pressure was an irrelevant anomaly. My turn, Naruto growled. He shot forward, a golden blur of speed, aiming a punch with enough force to level a mountain at the nearest warden, the bulwark. The punch connected with one of the hexagonal shields. There was no shockwave, no grand explosion. The kinetic energy was simply absorbed, nullified. The bulwark didn't even flinch. This was not a fight they could win with brute force. They were completely, utterly outmatched. Split up. Use the buildings. Naruto yelled, his mind racing. A direct confrontation was suicide. Kuroka didn't need to be told twice. She darted into a ruined storefront, her feline agility allowing her to navigate the rubble with ease. Naruto followed suit, smashing through a wall into an adjacent building. The fight transformed from an open field execution into a deadly game of cat and mouse in an urban jungle. This was his element. This was the kind of fighting a shinobi was born for. Their strategy shifted. Naruto became the bait, the unstoppable force. He would burst from cover, unleashing devastating attacks, not to defeat the wardens, but to force them to react, to draw their attention. He used Kurama's Cha, KRA arms to rip chunks of concrete from buildings, hurling them as projectiles, turning the city itself into his weapon. While the wardens focused on the overt threat of Naruto, Kuroka became the hidden blade. The anchor's nullification field was powerful, but it was centered on the warden itself. By constantly moving, creating distance, Kuroka could find momentary windows where she was free of its influence. In those split seconds, she would unleash her power. A quick burst of Yujutsu wouldn't create a teleportation portal, but it could warp the space just enough to make the hunter's blade miss its mark by an inch. A pulse of Senjutsu, too brief to be fully suppressed, wouldn't create a powerful blast, but it would give her a preternatural sense of the warden's movements, allowing her to feed Naruto warnings through their shared mental link. They were surviving. They were fighting smart, but they were doing no real damage. The bulwark's shields were absolute, and the other wardens' coordinated attacks left no openings. They were being slowly, systematically worn down. The censor's mental attacks were the worst. It dredged up their deepest pains. Naruto was forced to relive the death of Jiraiya, the pain of his lonely childhood. Kuroka was confronted with visions of her sister, Kaneko, looking at her with hatred and disgust, calling her a murderer. The psychic assault was as draining as any physical blow. They managed to isolate the hunter, cornering it in a multi-story car park. Naruto engaged it in a ferocious close-quarters battle, his six-paths sage mode granting him He precognition needed to barely keep up with its spatial warping. He created an opening, and Kuroka, from her hiding spot, unleashed the most powerful blast of Senjutsu she could muster. It struck the hunter dead on, and was absorbed harmlessly by a hexagonal shield that the bulwark had manifested in front of it from a block away. Their trap had failed, and it had left them exposed. You have proven impressively resilient. Zerachiel's voice echoed as he descended into the car park, his spear of pure, soul-searing light glowing ominously. The other wardens moved to cut off any escape. But your chaotic defiance ends now. He raised his spear, aiming it not at Naruto, but at Kuroka. The corrupted native entity will be cleansed first. Time seemed to stop. Naruto saw the spear tip glow, saw the look of horrified acceptance on Kuroka's face. She was drained, exposed, with nowhere to run. He had brought her into this. He had promised her peace. And now she was going to die for his sake. An all-consuming, desperate rage, colder and blacker than anything he had ever felt, washed over him. He would not allow it. He refused to allow this outcome. The final seal within his soul did not just click, it shattered. It was not an explosion of power. It was a release of something subtle, insidious, and utterly wrong. A faint, sickly green aura, almost invisible, emanated from Naruto's body. The air grew heavy, not with pressure, but with a feeling of rot and finality. A single, withered leaf fell from a nearby tree, turning to dust before it hit the ground. This was the horseman of pestilence. The change was immediate. The wardens, beings of perfect, self-sustaining divine energy, faltered. The purifier's white-hot flames flickered, their color tinged with a foul, grayish hue. The Ensor's mental assault cut off with a psychic screech of pain as a spiritual malady infected its consciousness. The hunter's perfect movements became a fraction of a second slower, its divine grace marred by a sudden, crippling lethargy. Zerachiel's soul-cleaving spear, aimed at Kuroka, dimmed, the light at its tip sputtering as if its power source was being corroded from within. But the most dramatic effect was on the bulwark. Its unbreakable conceptual shields, the linchpin of the warden's invincibility, began to flicker. Micro-fractures, like cracks in old glass, spread across their surface. The concept of decay was antithetical to the concept of perfect order. Naruto's new power was not attacking their shields, it was unmaking the very principle that made them strong. What is this, corruption? Zerachiel's voice held the slightest hint of confusion for the first time. Naruto didn't answer. He moved. His war aspect flared, now augmented by the corroding touch of pestilence. He appeared before the bulwark, his fist cloaked in Kurama's chakra, which now swirled with the sickly green aura. He punched the fractured shield. This time, it shattered. A wave of conceptual feedback blasted the bulwark backward, its armored form cracking. The perfect symphony of the wardens had been broken. They were vulnerable. Now, Kuroka, Naruto roared. Freed from the sensor's influence and the anchor's absolute suppression, Kuroka unleashed her full power. Drawing on every ounce of natural energy she could gather, she created a massive, swirling vortex of raw senjutsu and hurled it at the disoriented phalanx. The blast struck true, engulfing the hunter and the anchor. For the first time, a warden cried out in something that sounded like pain. Naruto charged Zerachiel. Their weapons clashed, Naruto's truth-seeking rod against the warden's spear of light. The impact sent a shockwave that tore the car park apart. They were fighting on even ground. Zerachiel looked at his damaged phalanx, at the Harbinger who was now radiating an energy that actively corroded his own, and made a tactical decision. To continue the engagement would risk the destruction of his unit. The Harbinger had evolved again. Their data was incomplete. Less than phalanx, withdraw, greater than his command was sent mentally. Less than mission parameters have changed. The anomaly's corruption potential is higher than anticipated. We will return with a revised purification strategy. Greater than. With a final, hateful glare at Naruto, Zerachiel and his wardens vanished in a flash of silver light, retreating as quickly and efficiently as they had arrived. They were gone. The sickly green aura around Naruto faded, and he collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath. The power of three aspects coursing through him had pushed his body and soul to the absolute brink. He was drained, wounded, and trembling from the strain. Kuroka rushed to his side, her own body bruised and battered. She helped him to his feet, her support the only thing holding him up. They stood together in the ruins of their battlefield, surrounded by shattered concrete and the lingering, sterile scent of celestial power. They had won. No, that wasn't right. They hadn't won. They had survived. They had stared into the face of absolute, implacable judgment and had managed to make it blink. But they both knew, with a chilling certainty, that the wardens would be back. And next time, they would be prepared for the corruption he wielded. Across the city, the supernatural factions had watched the entire battle unfold through magical scrying and sensory abilities. They had witnessed the wardens' perfection, Naruto and Kuroka's desperation, and the awakening of a terrifying new power. And they all came to the same, horrifying conclusion. The ultimatum had not been a threat directed only at Naruto. It was a promise to their entire world. And the only thing standing between them and total, systematic cleansing was the very harbinger the Celestials had come to destroy. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Serpent's Offer. The silence that followed the warden's retreat was heavier than any sound. It was a void, filled with the dust of pulverized concrete, the scent of ozone and celestial decay, and the palpable, city-wide terror of a world that had just stared into its own open grave. Kuo was a wreck. The downtown area, where the battle had raged, looked like it had been hit by an earthquake and a neutron bomb simultaneously. Buildings were carved in half, roads were craters, and a chilling, sterile energy lingered in the air, making the skin crawl. For Naruto and Kuroka, the return to their ruined apartment was a grim homecoming. They were battered, bruised, and bone-deep exhausted. Kuroka had a long, shallow gash along her side from a glancing blow by the hunter's blade. A wound that sizzled with residual holy energy, making it difficult for her demonic physiology to heal. But Naruto's injuries were deeper. He sat on a piece of rubble that had once been their wall, his head in his hands, trying to scrub the feeling of the pestilence aspect from his soul. The power of war was a clean fury, a blazing inferno of focused conflict. Famine was a cold, hungry emptiness. But pestilence was vile. It was the feeling of rot, of wrongness, of life curdling and turning in on itself. When he had used it, he had felt the divine life force of the wardens wither under his touch. And the sensation had made him sick to his stomach. It was a corrupting power, and he hated that it was a part of him. Don't. Kuroka's voice was soft as she knelt before him, gently prying his hands away from his face. She began cleaning a cut on his temple with a piece of cloth she'd salvaged. Don't blame yourself for the power you have. It saved my life. It saved us. It felt wrong, he rasped, his voice raw. It's a power that shouldn't exist. A lot of things shouldn't exist, she countered, her golden eyes serious. Beings of light who want to erase a world. Because it doesn't fit their definition of order. They shouldn't exist either. But they do. And you are the only thing that can fight them. Her touch was gentle, her words a balm on his frayed spirit. They were no longer just a warrior and his advisor. They were two halves of a whole, tending to each other's wounds, both visible and unseen. While they recovered, the supernatural world was in a state of controlled panic. Emergency councils were convened in the underworld and Grigori. The battle had been magically observed by the highest echelons of all three factions, and the footage was being analyzed with grim fascination. They had all come to the same conclusion. They were insects, living in a house that a group of exterminators had just marked for fumigation. Their internal squabbles, their centuries of war and politics, all seemed utterly meaningless in the face of the Warden's absolute power and conviction. And Naruto, the Harbinger, was both the cause of their impending doom and their only, terrifying hope. They were not left to their recovery for long. A new presence seeped into the ruined apartment. It was not the oppressive order of the Wardens, nor the familiar energies of devil or fallen angel. This was something else entirely. It was an aura of perfect, unblemished silence. An energy that felt infinitely deep, ancient, and utterly neutral. It was the feeling of the void between stars. The quiet of a universe before creation. A young girl with long, dark hair and dead, emotionless eyes simply appeared. She wore a black gothic Lolita dress and seemed no older than 13. But the power she radiated was so immense, so boundless, that it made Sears's Lucifer seem like a child. Naruto felt Kurama shrink back within him, not in fear, but in primal awe. This was a being on the level of his world's sage of six paths, perhaps even beyond. This was Ophis, the Ouroboros dragon, the infinite dragon god. The leader of the Chaos Brigade. She looked at them with a placid, unnerving calm. "You are loud," she said, her voice a soft, toneless monotone. "Your fighting disturbed my quiet." Naruto instinctively moved in front of Kuroka, his body tensing, ready for a fight he knew he could not possibly win. "I am not here to fight," Ophis stated, seeming to read his intent. "I am here to make an offer. The beings you fought, the cleaners, they are a threat to me. They enforce the cycle of creation and destruction. They enforce the rules. My existence is infinite. I am against the rules. They wish to erase you because you are a chaotic anomaly. I wish to ally with you for the same reason." Her logic was simple, direct, and stripped of all emotion. She saw the world in a way no mortal, devil, or god could. "The Chaos Brigade is my tool to achieve my goal, silence. I wish to return to my home, the dimensional gap, and be rid of the noise of this world and its current occupant, Great Red," she continued, her dead eyes fixed on Naruto. "The cleaners will sterilize this entire dimension if they believe it is the only way to destroy you. This will also disrupt my plans. Therefore, our goals are temporarily aligned. I offer you an alliance." She raised a delicate hand. "Join me. The power of the Chaos Brigade will be at your disposal. Valley Lucifer and his Longinus, the descendants of the great heroes, rogue gods from a dozen pantheons. All of it. We will destroy the cleaners together. I can even help you understand the forces you contain. You are a tear in the fabric of this world's reality. I find that interesting." The offer hung in the air, a temptation of immense weight. To have the full might of the most feared terrorist organization in the world on their side. To have an infinite dragon god as an ally. It was a path to survival. A clear, logical, powerful path. Kuroka, ever the pragmatist, felt the pull of that logic. She had spent her entire life surviving, making hard choices, and doing what was necessary. Fighting the Wardens alone was suicide. She knew that. "Naruto," she began, her voice low. "She's not wrong. We barely survived against 6 of them. What happens when they send 60? Or 600? The Chaos Brigade is evil, but the Wardens are extinction. Sometimes, you have to dance with the devil to get out of hell, Nya. Her words were a bitter pill of reason, and Naruto felt its weight. But as he looked at the emotionless dragon god before him, he saw the faces of the people she had hurt. The innocent lives destroyed by the Chaos Brigade's attacks, the chaos they spread for their own selfish goals. He saw faces of his friends from his old world, Sakura, Kakashi, Jiraiya, and thought of what they would say if they saw him siding with people who embodied the very things they had fought and died to stop. This was their first true disagreement. Their first major ideological conflict. Kuroka was arguing for survival at any cost. Naruto was arguing that some costs were too high. And what happens after? Naruto asked, his voice cutting through the silence, directed at Office. After we fight your battle for you and destroy the wardens, you go back to trying to tear the world apart for your own selfish dream of silence. We'd just be trading one apocalypse for another. We would be trading a swift execution for a slow, cancerous death. He looked back at Kuroka, his eyes pleading for her to understand. We can't do this, Kuroka. We can't become them. If we win by sacrificing our souls, then what's the point of winning at all? We'd just be monsters fighting other monsters. Kuroka looked from Naruto's passionate, resolute face to Office's cold, empty one. She saw the truth in his words. Survival was meaningless if you lost yourself to achieve it. Her pragmatism warred with her love for the man standing before her. A man whose unbreakable moral compass was both his greatest strength and his most glaring weakness in this ruthless world. But it was that very compass that she had fallen in love with. Her shoulders slumped slightly, her argument dying on her lips. She trusted him. She chose him. Naruto turned back to Office, his decision made, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. We refuse your offer. Office's expression did not change. She was incapable of surprise or anger. She simply processed the information. We will fight the wardens, Naruto continued, his presence seeming to grow. Taking on the weight of a king making a decree. And if you and your Chaos Brigade threaten the innocent people of this world, we will fight you too. We are not your allies. We are not your enemies. We are our own faction. And we will protect this world from anyone who tries to destroy it. It was an insane declaration. A faction of two, declaring war on both the greatest threat the world had ever known. And the most powerful terrorist group in existence. It was magnificent in its sheer, defiant audacity. Office blinked once, a slow, reptilian motion. Illogical, she stated, not as a judgment, but as a simple observation. The cycle of this world is ending. The cleaners are an inevitability, a function of reality itself. You cannot stop the tide alone. She began to fade, her form becoming translucent. When you are drowning in that tide, my offer for an alliance will still stand. The enemy of my enemy is a useful tool. For now, she vanished, leaving behind only the profound silence she craved. Naruto and Kuroka were left alone in the ruins, the weight of their decision settling upon them. They were more isolated than ever before, having now formally refused alliances with every major power in the world. They had only each other. Kuroka stepped up beside him, her hand finding his. You're an idiot, she said softly. I know, he replied. A stubborn, reckless, impossibly noble idiot. I know that, too. Quote, she squeezed his hand, her grip like steel. And you're my idiot. A fierce, proud smile touched her lips. So I guess we'll just have to show them all what a faction of two can do. Their bond, having weathered its first ideological storm, was now stronger than ever. They were united not just by love and survival, but by a shared purpose. Meanwhile, in a realm of pure, unbearable light, the Arch-Warden Zerachiel stood before a being that defied description. It was a throne of solidified law, and upon it sat a presence, Metatron. Zerachiel's report was delivered telepathically. A stream of pure data. Less than. The Harbinger has manifested a third aspect. A conceptual power of decay we have designated, pestilence. It is a direct counter to our nature as beings of perfect order. The extermination phalanx is insufficient to guarantee purification without unacceptable losses. Greater than. The presence on the throne was silent for a long moment. When it responded, the thought echoed through the very foundations of the celestial realm. Less than the anomaly's evolution is accelerating. Its corruption spreads. The time for surgical removal has passed. If the limb is gangrenous, we do not merely cut out the infection. We sever the limb entirely. I will descend myself. I will rewrite the laws of the corrupted world and unmake the Harbinger at a fundamental level. Prepare the purification protocol. The final judgment is at hand. Greater than. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The calm before the storm. The world held its breath. There was no other way to describe it. In the days that followed the Warden's retreat, a tense, suffocating quiet settled over the supernatural world. It wasn't peace, it was the eerie stillness of an animal that knows a predator is circling just beyond the firelight. Metatron's intent to descend was not a secret communicated in words, but a fundamental truth that could be felt on a cosmic scale. Seers in every faction were struck blind by visions of a silver, silent apocalypse. The very laws of magic felt brittle, as if the universe were a pane of glass beginning to strain under an immense weight. The impending judgment was a certainty, and every being the senses to perceive it felt the chill of their own mortality. Naruto and Kuroka's apartment, or what was left of it, was no longer a viable base. It was a crater, a landmark on a battlefield, a place where the sterile scent of the wardens still clung like a shroud. They needed to disappear. The offer came from an unexpected, though logical, source. A small, unassuming magic circle appeared before them, and from it stepped a smirking, leather-clad Azazel. "Quite the mess you two make," the fallen angel governor said, surveying the destruction with an appraising eye. "Look, I know you're not looking for allies. But you can't prepare for the end of the world sitting in a pile of rubble. Grigori has properties, old research outposts, magically shielded, off every grid imaginable. There's one in the mountains just north of here. It's yours to use, no strings." Naruto looked at him, suspicion warring with pragmatism. "Why?" Azazel's smirk faded, replaced by a rare, grim seriousness. "Because I live on this planet. And I'd very much like to continue doing so. The data I gathered from your fight was terrifying. This Metatron isn't coming to conquer, he's coming to delete. You are, whether any of us like it or not, the world's only active antivirus software. Consider this a hardware upgrade." The outpost was perfect, a sleek, semi-subterranean complex built into the side of a remote mountain. Shielded by layers of ancient runes and modern cloaking technology, it was stocked with supplies, a training facility, and a library of information that made Kuroka's eyes go wide. It was here, in this isolated fortress, that Naruto began the most important training of his life. He knew he couldn't win if his powers were just a series of desperate, reactive trump cards. He had to gain conscious, deliberate control. He had to learn to wield the aspects of the apocalypse, not just be a vessel for them. The process was grueling and fraught with danger. Kuroka became his partner, his teacher, and his anchor. He started with war. He would stand in the center of the vast training room and try to summon the ethereal armor at will. For hours, nothing would happen. He was trying to force it with power, with chakra. "That's not it," Kuroka told him, circling him like a patient sensei. "When it came out before, you weren't trying. You were deciding. You decided to end the fight with Riser. You decided to protect me. It's not about power, handsome. It's about conviction." He took her words to heart. He stopped focusing on power and focused on purpose. He thought of the wardens, of their cold, absolute judgment. He focused on his unwavering resolve to protect Kuroka, to protect this world. A flicker, a single gauntlet of golden, ethereal armor formed over his hand. It was a start. Famine was harder. It was a horrifying power, and his very soul recoiled from its cold, hungry emptiness. He started small, placing a fresh apple on a table and trying to project the draining aura onto it. At first, the power lashed out, the entire room growing cold, the lights flickering as it tried to absorb all energy indiscriminately. "Ground yourself, Naruto." Kuroka's voice was sharp, cutting through the haze. She placed her hand on his back, her own vibrant, warm life force a stark contrast to the void he was touching. "Don't become the hunger. Command it. Tell it what to eat." He focused on her warmth, on the feeling of her life next to his. He channeled the power, narrowing its focus, aiming the concept of absence at the single piece of fruit. The apple didn't rot, it simply withered. It aged a century in a second, turning to a dry, weightless husk that crumbled to dust. He had done it, but the effort left him pale and sweating. Pestilence was the worst, just touching that power felt like plunging his hands into a pool of spiritual gangrene. He refused to practice it on anything living. He focused on a steel training dummy, trying to summon the subtle, corrupting field of decay. A faint, sickly green haze surrounded the dummy, and ugly, rust-colored patches bloomed across its surface, the metal groaning as its molecular structure began to unravel. He pulled the power back instantly. Disgusted by the sensation, "I hate this one," he gasped, leaning against a wall. "I know," Kuroka said softly, coming to his side. But you might need it. Knowing how to use it is better than it just bursting out of you. During these intense sessions, they were not left entirely alone. The world was preparing to make its stand, and it had chosen its champion. First came Searzex, accompanied by Rias and Sona. They arrived not as superiors, but as supplicants. "We cannot fight a being like Metatron," Searzex said, his usual charisma replaced by a somber gravity. "He operates on a level of reality that is beyond us. Our armies would be irrelevant. But we can fight his vanguard. We can be your shield. The combined forces of the underworld will engage the lesser Warden armies. The phalanxes he will undoubtedly bring with him. We will buy you time. Time to face Metatron alone." Next came Azazel, his arms loaded with data crystals and ancient scrolls. "My people have been analyzing Metatron's energy signature since the moment we felt his approach," the fallen angel leader said, spreading a holographic map on the table. "He isn't just powerful, he's the architect of the divine system. He writes the rules. Fighting him is like trying to punch the law of gravity. But even rules can be bent. He has a core, a central processing unit, so to speak. If you can reach it, if you can damage it, you might be able to force a system reset." The most surprising visitor was the last. A portal of pure, golden light opened, and from it stepped the Archangel Gabriel. Her beauty was breathtaking, but her face was etched with a profound sorrow. "Heaven cannot raise its hand against Metatron," she said, her voice like the chiming of 1,000 silver bells. "He is a cornerstone of the system that gives us our power. To fight him would be to unravel our very existence. But the order he seeks to impose is one of silence and stasis, a universe without free will, without love. It is a perversion of my father's creation." She approached Kuroka, her presence warm and comforting. "The Wardens will target you to get to him. You are his anchor, but you are also his vulnerability." She placed a gentle hand on Kuroka's head. A soft, golden light enveloped the Nekomata, who gasped as a feeling of warmth and serene strength filled her. "I grant you my blessing. It will not make you immune to their power, but it will shield you from the worst of their conceptual attacks. It is all I can do." The three great factions, ancient enemies, were now united in a desperate, covert alliance. With Naruto and Kuroka at its epicenter. Amidst the endless training and grim war councils, they found moments of peace, slivers of quiet that were all the more precious for their scarcity. In the evenings, they would sit together, looking out at the star-dusted mountain sky, and they would talk. Naruto told her everything. About his parents, Minato and Kushina, and the sacrifice they made. About his lonely, hated childhood as the village pariah. About his bond with Kurama, growing from a prisoner and warden to true partners. He spoke of Team 7, of the brotherhood with Sasuke, and the promise he had struggled so long to keep. He spoke of Jiraiya, his perverted, wise, and beloved master, and the gut-wrenching pain of his loss. He laid the entire landscape of his soul bare for her. In return, Kuroka finally told him her full story. She spoke of her former master, a high-ranking devil who was obsessed with creating a super race of devils and Nekomata. His experiments were twisted and cruel. When he decided to experiment on her younger sister, Kaneko, Kuroka had snapped. She had killed him, not for power, but to protect her family. In the ensuing chaos and panic, she had fled, branded a traitor and a murderer, leaving her sister behind to be raised by the Grimori family, forever believing the worst of her. "I did it to save her," Kuroka whispered, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "And she's hated me for it ever since. I lost everything that night." Naruto pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held her, letting her feel his presence. His unwavering support. "You're not alone anymore," he murmured into her hair. "No matter what happens, you have me." They were no longer just fighting for a world. They were fighting for the future they were building in these quiet moments, a future they refused to let anyone take from them. The calm shattered on the 29th day. It started not with an explosion, but with a change. The city of Kyoto, a place of ancient temples and a powerful confluence of supernatural and natural energies, began to be rewritten. The sky above the city transformed into a perfect, seamless dome of silver light. The physical laws within that dome began to warp. Gravity became a suggestion, not a rule. Time flowed at a different rate. The vibrant, living city was being turned into a sterile, geometric temple. A divine beachhead on Earth. Metatron had arrived. His ultimatum was not delivered by a herald. It was a thought, inserted directly and simultaneously into the mind of every supernatural being on the planet, every devil, angel, fallen, yokai, god, and dragon. His voice was not loud or angry. It was a thing of pure, crystalline logic, as calm and as inescapable as a mathematical proof. The entity designated Harbinger as a flaw in the grand design of this reality. Its continued existence invites a cascade of systemic corruption. This cannot be permitted. He vessel of this anomaly resides in this region. Surrender the Harbinger to be unmade, and the integrity of this world system will be preserved. Refusal will be interpreted as a sign of systemic, worldwide corruption. In such an event, this world will be designated for purification. The process will begin at the next sunrise. You have until dawn to comply. The deadline had been set. The Fin-Al battle was no longer a distant threat. It was hours away. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Fourth Seal. Dawn was a fragile promise, a thin, bloody line drawn across the eastern mountain peaks. In the sterile silence of the Grigori outpost, Naruto and Kuroka stood before the main viewport, watching the world prepare for its potential end. There were no grand speeches, no tearful goodbyes. Everything that needed to be said had been said in the quiet moments of the night, in shared stories and silent embraces. He had braided a small, intricate knot into a lock of her black hair. She had adjusted the collar of his simple, dark jacket. They were small, human gestures in the face of an inhuman, cosmic threat. He had gained a fragile, tenuous control over his powers. He could feel the three aspects lying dormant within him. The burning conviction of war, the cold hunger of famine, and the sickly decay of pestilence. They were not tamed, but he could now call upon them, rather than waiting for them to claw their way out. He hoped it would be enough. Kuroka's hand found his, her fingers lacing through his own. Her touch was the only thing in the world that felt completely real. "Promise me," she whispered, her voice a fierce, low murmur. "Always," he replied, his eyes never leaving the horizon. It was a promise to return, a promise to survive, a promise to build the future they had fought so hard for. As the first, pure ray of sunlight crested the mountains, the world went to war. It was not a single battle, but a global conflagration. Across the planet, silver tiers in reality opened, and from them marched the warden phalanxes, their mission no longer containment, but purification. They emerged in the underworld, in the floating city of Agrias, in the heartlands of heaven itself. And the world fought back. In the crimson skies above the Grimoire domain, Sears Lucifer, his face a mask of grim fury, unleashed his power of destruction, erasing entire legions of wardens in waves of absolute annihilation. In the skies above the Vatican, the Archangel Michael, his 10 golden wings blazing, led the armies of heaven, their lances of light clashing against the wardens, sterile perfection. And in the war-torn skies of Kuo, Azazel, clad in his draconic downfall dragon spear armor, led a combined force of fallen angels and devils, Rias Grimoire and Sona Citri's Peerage's fight. With a desperate ferocity born of defending their home. It was a desperate, hopeless battle, a strategic diversion on a planetary scale, designed to buy one man the time he needed. Naruto and Kuroka felt the shockwaves of these battles even from their mountain fortress. It was time. With a final squeeze of her hand, they vanished, Kuroka's Yujutsu, shielded and amplified by Gabriel's blessing, teleporting them to the heart of the storm, Kyoto. The city was unrecognizable. It was a place of impossible, sterile beauty, a testament to Metatron's power. The ancient temples had been transformed into towers of polished, seamless silver. The sky was a perfect, unchanging dome of light. The very air hummed with the pure, mathematical logic of order. Patrolling the geometric streets were lesser wardens, more akin to automated antibodies than soldiers, their movements perfectly synchronized. "He's at the center," Naruto said, his sage mode senses struggling to make sense of the alien energies. At the Kinkaku-ji temple, or what's left of it, they didn't sneak. They announced their presence with a storm of their own. Naruto charged forward, the armor of war flowing over his form in a wave of golden light. Kuroka was at his side, a blur of black, her hands glowing with the potent, nature-infused energy of Senjutsu. Their assault was a perfect, coordinated dance. Naruto was the hammer. He smashed through the warden constructs, his movements fluid as he shifted his power. A punch infused with the conviction of war would shatter a warden's shell. A gesture would project the aura of famine, draining the energy from a whole squad, causing them to freeze and crumble. He would touch a defense line, and the subtle corrosion of pestilence would spread through their ranks, causing their perfect formations to collapse. He was in control, wielding the aspects as weapons, not just being wielded by them. Kuroka was the rapier. Shielded by Gabriel's blessing, she could now pierce the oppressive veil of order. She darted through the chaos, finding the seams in Metatron's perfect design. A blast of Senjutsu would strike not the warden, but the precise point on the ground where the geometric energy lines converged, causing a chain reaction that took out a dozen of them. She was his spotter, his partner, her instincts and his power working as one. They tore a path through the heart of the rewritten city, arriving at a vast, open plaza before a golden temple that now gleamed with a blinding silver light. And there, upon a throne that seemed to be woven from the very laws of physics, sat Metatron. He was not a physical being. He was a humanoid shape made of pure, condensed concept, a being of light and logic. He watched their arrival not with anger or surprise, but with the detached interest of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. The anomaly. Metatron's voice was the sound of a star singing its final, perfect note. You have arrived. Your defiance is spirited, but ultimately, an exercise in futility. Naruto strode forward, the armor of war blazing. This world is not yours to erase. Metatron did not rise. He simply raised a hand. This domain is now a zone of absolute peace. The armor of war dissolved into nothing. The very concept of conflict, the foundation of the power, ceased to exist in a 1,000-foot radius around the throne. Naruto's rage, his conviction, his fighting spirit, it all vanished, leaving him feeling hollow and powerless. He grit his teeth and reached for his other powers. He unleashed the draining aura of famine. My existence is sustained by the wellspring of creation, Metatron stated. You are attempting to drain an ocean with a thimble. The power of famine washed over him, doing nothing. It was like trying to starve a sun. Desperate, Naruto summoned the corrupting touch of pestilence. I am a being of perfect, immutable order. Metatron's voice was utterly calm. The concept of decay is a flaw in the system. I am the system. You cannot infect a principle. The sickly green aura dissolved before it could even reach the throne. Naruto stood there, stripped of all his apocalyptic power, left with only his own dwindling chakra. The battle was a complete, one-sided defeat. You see, Metatron explained, a sense of cosmic pity in his voice. You struggle against the rules. I am the rules. Your existence is a bug in the code of reality. I am the programmer who has come to delete it. He raised his hand, and a point of light, more brilliant than a sun, formed at his fingertip. It was an attack that did not travel through space, but simply unmade it, an attack that would erase Naruto from all timelines, from all memory. It was in that moment of absolute hopelessness that Kuroka moved. She knew she couldn't stop the attack. Gabriel's blessing would not save her from this. But she could intercept it. She appeared in front of Naruto in a flash of movement, her arms spread wide, shielding him with her body. No, Naruto screamed. The point of light struck her. There was no sound, no explosion. Her body began to flake away into particles of golden light. Her soul, her very existence, was being unraveled. She looked back at him over her shoulder, the life draining from her eyes, but on her lips was a small, sad, and utterly loving smile. My idiot. The thought was a faint, final whisper in his mind. And then she was gone. Naruto stared at the space where she had been, at the fading motes of light that were all that was left of his anchor, his partner, his entire world. Something inside him did not just break. It ended. The rage of war, the hunger of famine, the corruption of pestilence, all those violent, struggling emotions vanished. They were replaced by a profound, endless, and absolute calm. A cold, quiet certainty. He finally understood. His powers had all been about defying an end. But there is one power that does not defy. It does not struggle. It simply is. He did not scream. He did not rage. He willingly, consciously, opened the final seal. The transformation was absolute silence. The world did not shake. All color, all sound, all energy, seemed to drain out of the universe, pulled into him. His hair turned bone white. His skin became pale as alabaster. The clothes on his body transformed into a simple, hooded black robe that seemed to be woven from shadows and finality. When he opened his eyes, they were not glowing. They were perfect, empty, black voids, holes in reality that promised nothingness. He was no longer the vessel for a horseman. He was the horseman of death. Metatron, the being of perfect creation and immutable law, paused. For the first time in its eons of existence, it felt a presence that was its perfect and total antithesis. It could not rewrite this law. It could not define this concept away. For death is the final law, the one to which all others, even creation itself, are ultimately subject. Naruto did not launch an attack. He simply took a step. He walked through Metatron's zone of peace. He walked through the very laws of physics that Metatron had defined. They did not apply to him. He was the exception to every rule. He reached the throne. Metatron, for the first time, manifested a weapon, a sort of pure, solidified creation. It swung at Naruto. Naruto did not block it. He simply raised a hand, and the blade stopped inches from his face. Its divine energy unraveling, its physical form turning to dust. He reached out, his pale, cold hand touching the radiant chest of the being of pure light. There was no flash, no explosion, no final, dying scream. Metatron, the voice of God, the architect of the divine system, the embodiment of creation and law, simply ceased to be. His story had ended. The final page had been turned. He was a law that had been rendered obsolete by the final law of all. The moment he was gone, his influence over the world shattered. The silver dome above Kyoto cracked and dissolved into nothing. The rewritten city reverted to its normal, chaotic, beautiful self. Across the globe, the warden armies, their power source and purpose now gone, crumbled into silver dust and vanished on the wind. The war was over. Naruto stood alone in the restored temple plaza, the absolute power of death now calm and settled within him. It was not a wild force, but a quiet, certain part of his soul. He too, RNED his gaze to the spot where Kuroka had vanished. The motes of her soul were still there, scattered, fading. He raised a hand. He was not just the embodiment of the end, he was the master of its threshold. He held authority over the concepts of life and death. He did not command the motes to return with force. He simply rebuked their fading. He called her name, and the scattered pieces of her soul, her very existence, answered. The golden particles of light swirled, drawn back together by his will. They coalesced, weaving themselves back into the form he knew better than his own. Her hair, her eyes, her smile. He did not just heal her, he reaffirmed her existence, denying her end. Kuroka's eyes fluttered open. She was whole, unharmed, lying on the stone floor. She looked up at him, at the white-haired, black-robed figure who was both her Naruto and something more. She saw the infinite finality in his black eyes, but beneath it, she saw the same soul she loved. The power receded. His hair returned to its sun-kissed gold. His eyes to their cerulean blue. The black robe faded back into his simple jacket and pants. But the change was permanent. He was no longer just a vessel. The four aspects were now integrated. A part of him he could call upon, forever changing him into a being that stood between the worlds of the mortal and the divine. Epilogue. Weeks later, the world was healing. The scars of the warden's brief, terrifying war were still visible, but there was a new sense of unity among the factions, forged in the fires of near extinction. On a mountain peak overlooking Kuo, Naruto and Kuroka sat together. Watching the sun set, a gentle breeze rustled the trees. The world was quiet, peaceful. They were, without question, one of the great powers of this world. Feared, respected, and left utterly alone. Just as they had always wanted. He was no longer just a lost shinobi, he was a fundamental force, a being who had looked a god in the eye and passed judgment. And she was the woman at his side. His queen, his partner, his anchor. The one who gave that cosmic force a human heart. She rested her head on his shoulder, her tail wrapping contentedly around his arm. So, she purred, her voice back to its usual playful, sultry tone. A king with no kingdom. What's your first decree, handsome? He looked out at the horizon, at the endless possibilities of the future. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a builder, and they had a whole world to build their future in. He smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile, and squeezed her hand. "I decree it's your turn to find us dinner." She laughed, a bright, musical sound that echoed through the quiet mountains. It was the sound of a new beginning, a promise of a peace they had earned 1,000 times over. They faced an uncertain future, but they would face it together, their love the one absolute, unbreakable law in their own, small universe. Chapter 10 End.